I'm only on the clock in 5 slow drafts right now, but I'm on deck in 6 more. We'll make those picks today. But that also gives us time to answer more of your guys' questions, talk about any topics we want to hit on, plenty of strategy stuff, plenty to discuss. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. Yeah, I'm still getting used to the new audio because the old audio I liked, but it didn't. It got like a copyright strike, even though it shouldn't have. So we are on to new audio. Welcome in, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Bendels, I'm going to be doing a show with him later tonight over on his channel. Make sure to check that out. Welcome in, guys. Before we get too far, I want to make my first pick because I do have a pick that is about to time out or is close to timing out. I'm not about to, but I saw some new I'm showing 0 people watching the stream, which is I'm sitting here wondering if I did something wrong somehow, because usually that's not what it looks like on StreamYard, so it's kind of throwing me. I see some comments in the chat, so I assume you guys are here and hanging. We're still figuring out how to do all of this stuff. I'm trying to find the YouTube stream real quick. What's happening? Am I live? Can you guys hear me? It seems like I am not live yet. Weird. It just went live over on my other screen on YouTube. If you guys can hear me, let me know. I think there was a weird StreamYard thing there. When I went live, it kind of cut off the introduction. I tried to go to the YouTube page and it looked like I hadn't gone live yet, but I had. You guys are saying, can hear you fine, can hear you now. Okay, but it seems like you guys might even be a little bit behind me. I already played the introduction. I already did the cold open, all that stuff. And then when I went over to the YouTube page, it wasn't live yet, and then it just popped in. So anyway, I was just saying, I got one draft that I'm within an hour on and wanted to jump into and make the pick on before we get too far. Gabe Davis says he just got the notification from YouTube a few seconds ago at 9:03. I went live right at 9. I wonder, usually I wait like a minute. I wonder if because I was watching the time click down. I went live right after it got to 0. So I wonder if I just went live a little bit too quick and didn't give it a sec to, tell me it was showtime and ready to go. At any rate, we're going to jump into our first puppy. The guys listening on the podcast are like, man, you spent 3-4 minutes to start this show trying to figure out technical difficulties. My apologies. Jumping into a super flex where I had the 106 and I started Stroud Daniels. They have the same bye. So this was an interesting one where, I just think Daniels is that good of a pick there. I took him over Caleb Williams and Brock Purdy, but behind Jordan Love, behind Dak, those are guys that he should be going over. Pocket passers that don't have the type of upside he does, especially in a super flex where you're going to have more QBs. And if he does get banged up, people are so worried about him getting hurt. But if he does get banged up, he's still going to hit the lineup when he's healthy. And then when he's not, you have other quarterbacks to cover it. It's not as demanding that you have a 17-game starter. Having said that, I paired him with CJ Stroud, and so I had double week 14 buys, which also made it tricky because a couple of the later round QBs you want to be able to hit also have week 14 buys. So like, and they actually went, Bo Nix went at 803, pick 87, 8 picks ahead of ADP, but he's another round 14 buy, week 14 buy. Drake May went 1 pick before my pick at pick 78. He went at 77, 9 picks ahead of his ADP. Which is just to say that, I mean, this has both been a very quarterback heavy room, and both of those guys are typically on my radar as a QB3 in this format, but weren't in this draft when I started with 2 round 14 buys. It's a tricky thing about the Superflex thing. Those round 14 buys do stack up pretty quickly, with Daniels being an easy second round click, I think. Stroud being a guy who, especially when he falls in the first round, is a nice first round pick. Lamar Jackson is a guy you can also take who has a 14th round buy, week 14 buy. I keep saying 14th round, week 14 buy. And then you get to the late rounds and multiple late round targets have the week 14 buy. So it does become tricky the way that all lines up. So at this point, I only have the 2 quarterbacks, Stroud and Daniels. I never got another one. I do think I will add speculative quarterbacks at some point. We'll see how far down that goes, because it's not time to jump into Aiden O'Connell in the 10th round. Gardner Minshew just came off. O'Connell typically goes a few rounds later than this. Sam Darnold is there. Jacoby Brissett won't be an option with the 14 buy as well. Michael Penix could be an option. Sam Howell can be an option. There's a lot of... Joe Flacco has the week 14 bye, but he would be another one that you could consider. That's another guy. Anthony Richardson, the starter in Indy, is another guy with a week 14 bye. I'm trying to kind of... I mean, a lot of these picks are not picks you want to be making. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what I will do there for my third QB. The other alternative is that I take a 0 QB in week 14, which is not ideal by any means. But every other week, I would be expecting to essentially start both Stroud and Daniels, and I'll get super flex support, because not taking a QB for the rest of that round 3 to round 9 range has allowed me to build out a pretty strong skill position group. So I have Kyren Williams as my RB1. I got him at pick 54. He was my 5th round pick. In between there, I got Drake London and Nico Collins. Took Collins a little ahead of where I would typically take him, but because of Stroud, or maybe I didn't in this draft, I took him right ahead of DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs. So I actually took him about where I would typically take him. It was a nice fit there. I might have even got some ADP value on him there. I did, about 5 picks. So this is a different draft than the one where I took him a little early that I was thinking of. I got a nice value on Nico. I took Drake London in the third. So London, Nico, top 2 receivers. Kyren Williams, I get Mark Andrews as a Houston bring back in the 6th. T. Higgins goes all the way to the 7th. I mean, we get some of these values that are just really falling in the Superflex format. Higgins here goes behind Hollywood Brown and George Pickens and Amari Cooper, and like 8 picks behind Amari, 4 picks behind Pickens, a couple of picks behind Hollywood Brown. That doesn't happen. Is it all Superflex today? No, not at all. Not at all. And GM, to all you guys, glad that you guys can hear me after the slow start. But yeah, T. Higgins, it's one of these things where you play in a different format. Suddenly the positional ADP is out of whack, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Why would Higgins be going behind these guys who, to me, are a tier behind him in normal drafts? I'm happy to take Higgins at the 3-4 turn. I'm not taking Pickens. I'm typically not taking Amari in the 4th. That's when I pivot and say, the receivers are starting to thin out. I want to take a tight end here. Hollywood Brown has risen, but it's like a 4-5 turn guy. And now he's going ahead of Higgins because the format change kind of throws off those values. But I don't think you'll see Hollywood Brown go ahead of Higgins in many BBMs. And then Keenan Allen is typically a 4-5 turn guy as well. He comes around and falls behind Xavier Worthy, Jaden Reed, Terry McLaurin. I mean, he goes in that range with those guys, and he's been sliding a little bit, but I end up getting him here 1 pick ahead of Rome Odunze. He goes a full round ahead of Rome Odunze, typically speaking. So one of the advantages in Superflex here is just trying to pick off the values that are available relative to the other formats. And so I at this point, I have the one running back, Kyron Williams, one tight end, Mark Andrews, 5 wide receivers, Drake London, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, and Jordan Addison. It's a really, there's not like an elite at the very top. London, your mileage may vary, and Nico as well. Your mileage may vary, but it's a really deep group. I think that's a really strong 5 wide receiver group, and you can only start 2 receivers, and there's 1 flex. I think I'll cover all of that with my receiver a lot, but I will also, with my receiver room a lot of the time, that flex, but I'll also help on the super flex room if Stroud or Daniels has a floor game. Still, though, I would like to have a QB starting week 14. So I'm going to have to add a third QB. But if you do a 2 QB build where you have these high-end guys, and then, one of the things it can do is it can allow you to get so much depth at another position that you can support the super flex with wide receiver spike weeks. I do only have the 1 elite tight end. Typically speaking, I'm looking at and trying to get multiple good tight ends. And actually, Brock Bowers is sitting there. The tricky thing is Dalton Schultz. So my queue right now is just all the correlation stuff. I've done this on some of these super flex drafts. I don't have a Jaden Daniels correlation yet, so Ben Sinnott becomes an option. Dalton Schultz is an option for my tight end too as well. But I also can play those guys in later rounds. Oh, the Daniels thing correlates with London, so that's what I was thinking there in the 3rd round. I do already have an Atlanta bring back. And Washington I can do through Luke McCaffrey, or just not even necessarily stack him in a huge way. We are at the point where receiver has thinned out. Christian Watson, Jameson Williams are off the board. This pick would be either my RB2, which I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see a few more names. The RB position. So at wide receiver, the top receivers are Cortland Sutton, Tyler Lockett, that tier. At running back, we have DeAndre Swift. We have James Conner, Jalen Warren, Raheem Mostert. It's very clear the value here is at running back relative to receiver, but I'm also looking at Brock Bowers here right at ADP as a really nice tight end too. Now I have the other outs at tight end too, and I have Andrews on this team, but I also think Aiden O'Connell might be the answer to my QB3 situation. So I could start to set that up. Sam Darnold's another option. I have that set up with Jordan Addison already. I'd like to have a couple outs because I don't know when these quarterbacks might go off the board. I doubt Darnold starts week 14. O'Connell's the one that, he took over after Antonio Pierce took over, and he was good down the stretch. He was better in the late games of the year than I realized. Somebody I talked about with a few different people this offseason has started to move my opinion on it. Earlier in the offseason felt like Minshew was probably going to start, but O'Connell played pretty well down the stretch last year, and they retained the coach that liked him, that put him in as soon as he took over and rode him late in the year. Antonio Pierce, he gets the full-time gig. He goes from interim to official head coach in the offseason. It feels to me like O'Connell has a pretty good shot to start. And even if Minshew gets the start at the beginning of the year, that O'Connell will play some this year. And thus, I think my pick here is going to be Bowers, because I think my preference for QB3 is already O'Connell. And if I'm playing the Raiders, it really needs to be Bowers or Adams. The Schultz and Sinnott things are, things I'd like to keep open, but they also both share the week 14 bye with Mark Andrews. So actually, neither of them's a good 2 tight end candidate anyway. Benny says AOC is a year older than Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, he's not like an elite prospect or anything. He's a little bit further on. That also speaks to Lawrence still being pretty young. I think you can also say the same about like Michael Penix, right? Lawrence is 24 to 250 days. Aiden O'Connell's already 25 and 285 days. They don't even have Michael Penix up on Pro Football Reference yet, but I imagine he's at least 24. Yeah, he was born in 2000. He's 24. He just turned 24, so he's younger than Lawrence by about a half a year. I think Bo Nix is the same, where that's one of those things with these guys. Yeah, he's also 24. He and Penix are about the exact same age. This is one of those things with the pandemic year, and a lot of these guys coming out have played like 6 years of college football now. So it's been a different world. Anyway, I'm going to take Bowers here. I'm going to get that locked up because I don't really have a good tight end 2 option that doesn't share his bye. Schultz and Sonat are not going to be options on this build after having Andrews. Bowers is a nice tight end 2, even if O'Connell isn't the pick, but he is somebody that I'm going to, star and keep an eye on in the next few rounds. So yeah, welcome in. That was the one that I wanted to pick early. I do have a few more Superflex. We have an Eliminator and a Marathon that I'm on the clock in each. I have other Eliminator Best Ball Mania picks coming up, but I did want to talk early here about a question I got on YouTube on the stream earlier this week. I'm going to go look it up. I'm going to read it to you guys because I thought it was a good launching off point today. Is from Austin Malone. It says, got a Houston triple stack. Nico, Diggs, Dell, Stroud out of the 5 hole. Started Jamar Chase. Went Worthy in the 6th for a true 0 RB approach. So it went Chase, Nico, Diggs, Dell, Stroud in the 5th, Worthy in the 6th. Wasn't expecting Dell to fall that late in the 4th. Can we talk through if this may be a bad approach, stacking with such high draft capital players? I really felt I need to draft Worthy in the 6th as he fell in the draft room on top of I can't really rely on more than 2 of them on a given week. And obviously some bad games from Houston here and there may only make 1 available. Didn't really know how to drive the rest of the draft other than punt, tight end, and second QB to get flyer running back depth. So Austin went with a really heavy stack. Wanted to know my thoughts on that and then also where I would go from there. And I think this is a really interesting question. First of all, over at the newsletter, I did a Monday mailbag this week. I answered some questions from a lot of the YouTube videos over there, and I've answered them on YouTube as well, but brought them over. A good Discord question as well. But one of them did ask me about double stacking early draft picks. This one says, I'm wondering at what point double stacking early picks hurts your upside in terms of field size. For example, Miami, Philly, Houston, teams that you can stack really heavily in the early rounds. I wrote that I wasn't really sure what the data says, but I had the same intuition from how I look at it. You want to be threading a needle of great picks and basically all the high leverage rounds to really build a monster team. And that's easier to do if they are not competing for the same production, the same offense. In round 1, I want the star in that offense. And then in round 2, I want the star in another offense, etc. In the later rounds, where the outlooks for every pick are a lot weaker and the opportunity cost on the picks I have to pass up is lower, I can essentially boost the projections of correlated players because I'm making a bet on an offense being good. Very similar to the point I just made about Luke McCaffrey with Jaden Daniels. When I have Jaden Daniels in a super flex and he's my second round pick, I'm betting on the Jaden Daniels ceiling season. If he's having a ceiling season, we've talked about this with the Texans last year. When Stroud hit, Nico and Dell came with, right? There is a correlation there. Even the Kyron and Puka stuff with the Rams are great correlation points because the fear for the Rams last year was Stafford would never be healthy. He'd get hurt. He'd be out. He'd miss a ton of time. Cooper Kupp might get hurt. They were going to implode because they imploded in 2022. This was never going to be a healthy team again. And then suddenly they actually do stay healthy. They get competitive again. And the full season correlation for the Rams was, Stafford still can play. He's still healthy enough. Well, there are people saying he was never going to be playing again. He might not, ever be healthy again and really play a full season and can, he's basically going to need to retire. And people were saying that with Kupp too. That's not the way it worked out. Sean McVay was back, was ready to go, had the offense in a good spot, even with, weaker personnel. And again, the concern at this time last year for the Rams, people didn't want to draft them because they thought that team was going to completely implode. I remember when I wrote my offseason stealing signals post over at the newsletter, I was basically like, what if they don't implode? Like that was my whole angle on them is I think this is a little bit of too much certainty from the market that the Rams are just going to implode again. They didn't. And Kyron and Puka had space to really hit ceiling seasons for them. They're both obviously great players and there's other reasons that they hit. But if Stafford would have gotten hurt, if, other things would have happened for the team to implode, they probably wouldn't have been as big a hits as they were. It's a correlated thing where because Stafford was a reasonable mid-round quarterback, the late round players that you tacked on with him had a better shot at a ceiling season. In that case, it was just that Stafford's healthy enough to play the whole season, and that elevates the floor of the offense and creates opportunity in an offense that clearly didn't have skill position depth for young players to hit. So that's sort of the idea of the late round correlation stuff. And I think that's really important. You can boost those projections on the correlated players in the late rounds when you're making a bet on an offense being good. I think it's harder to justify that with a bunch of early picks all in the same offense because it truly is a tough needle to thread for all of them to be hits. One of the counter arguments tends to be this point about, the way that the postseason can play out. If that triple stack, if Stroud is right for all 3 weeks, but 1 week it's Dell, 1 week it's Diggs, and 1 week it's Nico, you're advancing every week. I think that's a reasonable outcome within the range of outcomes, but there's a lot of things to consider within the range of outcomes, and I think that gets overweighted. That's a small probability outcome. It's not particularly likely to be that exact path. And that also requires pod luck in addition. Still, it requires certain other things to be true. It doesn't guarantee that a Stroud double doesn't still get there just because they didn't have the 1 week where Tank went off. They still had Stroud, and they had the week for the Stroud Nico stack to be right, and the week for the Stroud Diggs stack to be right, and then they had Stroud the other week, and maybe they got a replacement receiver, or they had an easier pod or whatever. I mean, it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to be overlapped with similar teams in the final week. Certainly, if the first 2 weeks are Stroud Nico, Stroud Diggs, and you also have Stroud Tank in the final round, it's more, but the thing is, Stroud will be so heavily represented in the final round that there will be teams that have Tank that they will have brought him along. I was just going to say, it's better that you have Tank because a lot of the Diggs and Nico teams will have advanced. But I think we think through this is it gets back to a point that I tweeted the other day that Jacob Sanderson wrote a piece this week at his Substack, Thinking About Thinking, and you guys should all go subscribe to this. He's an incredible analyst. And he looked at a lot of different things. I wrote on Twitter the other day that it was the best piece that I've read about fantasy football this offseason. I mean that wholeheartedly, and I don't say it lightly. I used to be an editor. I care a lot. I have a tendency to nitpick a lot of the assumptions that are made in articles for the analyses that are made. Some of this is, in fairness, is that, Jacob and I tend to think a lot alike. There's a lot of confirmation bias to some of his points. We've even discussed some of the points in the past. We chat a decent amount. So some of it is, biased for sure. But one of the points that he did a little bit of research on, which I loved that he went and researched this. It backed up an intuition that I've had, that the spike weeks that we tend to see in the postseason come more from full season hits than players that weren't good all season but spiked in the postseason. We talk about that. What if you get a low owned guy through? What if this really unique thing happens in weeks 15, 16, and 17? I think that can happen. I don't think it's optimal to be building teams expecting a really unique outcome in weeks 15, 16 to 17. And you have to get the team there, right? And I totally agree with the idea of we don't want to spend too much time on advance rate. It's more important to think about, if we get the team there, can it do positive things late? But I do think that goes too far, where we completely ignore advance rate and think solely about building this unique team as if it's DFS, and we are building it for the week that we know is there and we know our team's live for that week. You have to still be good in the regular season. You have to finish second out of the top, or top 2 out of 12. And there are ways that you can sap so much of your season-long upside that you don't have the ability to advance. I don't think that's the case with this question about the triple stack with Houston, because if Houston's the offense that goes nuts this year, if they contend for the Super Bowl, which I think they can do, honestly, they have this rookie QB window. They added to their defense. They made the Diggs trade because they're pushing in on the rookie QB window. They understand they have a huge cap advantage right now, and that's why they restructured Diggs to a 1-year deal. People have said they overpaid because they gave up a second-round pick for 1 year Diggs. I think it makes a lot of sense. They know they got to extend Stroud down the line. They already extended Nico. They're going to probably have to extend Dell. That's going to be the core of their passing game. They can't also be paying Stephon Diggs 3 years from now. But right now is when they can push in, and they've pushed in on defense, Danielle Hunter and some of the other plays they've made there. They also pushed in when they went forward in the draft last year where they took Stroud to additionally take Will Anderson, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Stroud won Offensive Rookie of the Year. I don't think people realize that their pass rush is going to be very, very good as well because of Will Anderson, because of the Danielle Hunter ad, because they added like Danico Autry and some other guys in their front seven. Their secondary may be still a little bit of a concern, but it's a good team. And if they hit in a huge way, then you're probably going to finish top 2 out of your 12 because it's going to be Stroud in the passing game, and those 3 receivers are all going to be on a season-long level going to be moving in the same direction. It gives you a strong floor. It's probably not likely that all of Diggs, Nico, and Dell can be like massive hits at their spot. But if Stroud is flirting with 5,000 yards and 50 TDs, which is like his elite passing upside, and I think it is possible. It's what Mahomes did in his second season. I think this is the point in a guy's career where he might flex his muscles a little bit. They might see what they have and really be pushing. The pass rate might really explode for them. We saw it, early in Josh Allen's career when his pass rate really exploded. It's something that these young teams or these teams with young quarterbacks tend to do is kind of see how far they can push it with how good they can be. And then I think a little bit later in their lifespan, it's like, well, we know we're going to be in the playoffs. We're kind of thinking about the playoffs. We're going to be a little bit more reserved and hold some things back in the regular season. That's definitely where the Mahomes Chiefs are right now. They seem to just take the regular season as like preseason games, and they're ready to go for the postseason. And they're always like, for 2 years in a row now, they've pulled out stuff in the Super Bowl that they hadn't put on film yet all year. It's like they held something back for the 20th or 21st game of the season. It's amazing. But all that said, I do think when you do the really expensive early stacks, it's actually less for me about the advance rate stuff. I think it hurts the advance rate stuff because I do think to have the very best team in fantasy football, if you think about it intuitively and you think about it from a perspective of like, yeah, I've played this for 20 plus years. You want to have the best pick in each round. It's really hard for the best pick in each round to be all from the same team. It's just there's 32 teams. There are multiple offenses that are going to be good. All of the very best players go in those rounds. So the opportunity cost is massive. You're missing out on all of the other best players. And now in this example, this question that was asked, he took Jamar Chase in the first round. So he's not missing out on the first round best player. But from round 2 through round 5, he doesn't take another player that's a non-Houston player. The back end of that, round 4, round 5, you do start to thin out the elite talent. And so I have less of a concern in round 4 and round 5 than I do in round 2. This isn't as big of an issue for me, this exact example, as like last year, people were taking A.J. Brown in like the top 5 so that they could then hit Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts at the 2-3 turn and get the big 3 from the Eagles. And A.J. Brown wasn't in the same tier as a top 5 picks. He was a back end of the first round pick that you were having to pull up a full tier. He was not on the same level as the guys as far as his range of outcomes and his probabilities as the guys going in the top 5 rounds. So now you're bypassing the very elite top 5 players. You're pulling A.J. Brown up into a range he doesn't belong just to then also take his teammates in late round 2 and early round 3, where there's a lot of other ceiling players. And you're not going to pick a single player that's not on the Eagles until about pick 46, the end of round 4. You're not going to win that way. It's just not going to happen, especially when you think about the playoffs, not even the full season element and the advance rate, but to have the ceiling that this correlation is attempting to have for the playoffs, you also need players around it. And if you're not going to draft a single other top 50 player, it's too many chips on the Eagles, in my opinion. And this year, with this Texans example, I wouldn't say it's necessarily too many. But the reason I'm emphasizing this so much is part of the question was, where do I go from here? And the way that I would build it from here is I would be extreme. I love the Xavier Worthy pick that he said he had to make in the 6th because he has 3 receivers with a week 14 bye that are all in the same offense. You are betting on the Texans, but you do need now more depth at receiver. Even though you also have Jamar Chase, you need probably 6, 7 good receivers because you've made such a heavy bet on wide receiver at those ADPs. You can do that before the wide receiver window closes. You can't do that necessarily late. You might wind up with basically only Texans receivers and nothing else at the high end, that could be helpful for the advance rate. And here's Austin. Oh, this is my team I sent. Need to rewind a bit. That could be helpful for the advance rate. I don't think it's going to get you there in the postseason. I think you need support from other high ceiling receivers in the postseason weeks, like a Xavier Worthy hitting late in the year, like a Jamar Chase in round 1. And I think you're going to need to continue to do that. I think you also want to try to hit an elite tight end if you can still. You could do late round tight end. He talked about punting wide receiver and playing a 0 RB strategy. And I think that's exactly right. I would do a more extreme 0 RB strategy in this build than in any other. I would want to continue to get even more receiver depth in the receiver window. I could not take a detour toward running back in like round 7. I would have to hit on some type of ceiling play there. Would want to hit tight end upside still, like I said, in the earlier windows. And then late round running back is the one thing you can do. And if you're right on that, it can provide ceiling, right? The example I keep using, and I talked about it on the last stream, why I keep using it, it's just the one that I looked at the roster the most, but it was the regular season champion roster from last year in BBM. That was the $1 million team. And it was a 0 RB team that even the top 0 RB picks, or the top running back picks that were like round 9, round 10, weren't the best running backs in that 0 RB build. It was Raheem Mostert in round 15, and it was or 14 or whatever it was, and Kyron Williams, I think, in the very last round 18. And there was another very late running back that was like the third best running back for this build. I can't remember who. Might have had like a Gus Edwards or something that, with Dobbins going down, was a very useful play. And so if you have that type of a hit, that can help pay off the lack of early capital on different offenses. It's like, how can I be right in more offenses around the league? Because it's only practical that there's going to be a lot of players that are right around the league. It can't all come from one offense. I do think we overstack, and I get asked this question a lot. And I mean, if you want to win these major terms, I understand the way that the structure is and the way that the playoffs can play out. The stacking stuff can be very helpful, but in a lot of cases, I also think we're just throwing on stacks because they're on the same team, and they're not good stacks. They're not like strong correlated players. They're just players. Now, the example I used a minute ago about the Rams, I thought Kyron Williams last year during draft season wasn't good enough. And so I got us off stacking him in the last round of a slow draft in August with the ship chasing crew, and regretted that the whole season. You can make mistakes there for sure. So there's definitely not like a certainty in all of this for me, but I do think being willing to be uncorrelated to seek good picks is like an edge now, because people are really seeking the overcorrelation, which, I mean, again, there's a reason for it, and I'm not disputing the reason for it. The reason for it is the concept of week 17 is all that matters. And if you do get there to week 17, and because the EV in week 17 is so much higher than or the gap in EV, or the potential winnings in EV from first to last is so much higher than even the rest of the season combined, that it does make sense to take a mentality that you want to have the most top heavy or the most GPP like lineup you can have in week 17, as if you were building it in a DFS week. And in some cases, then you want to be heavily stacked. I mean, one of the strong strategies in small field GPPs, which these would be considered small field, they're under 1,000 people, is to overstack in some cases and to be really in on one offense that then goes off and you have multiple pieces go off. But I do think in terms of the full season element of trying to get there, you're sacrificing something when you massively overstack, like multiple offenses in one build. I see a lot of these and people share them and they're like very stoked about how they got all the puzzle pieces to fit together. And I think that is a commendable goal, because there is an element to the drafting right now where it's like you're trying to build the best roster. And it's like doing a puzzle as a kid, right? Or some word game, some logic, game. I used to do these logic puzzles as a kid. My mom's variety crossword puzzle books and stuff. And it reminds me of that, where it's like, if you're sharp enough to think through how, all the 2v2s and the 3v3s, and you're going to be able to build all of the pieces together, you can have this really neat thing where everybody's correlated and it's very good. The more important part, though, is that all those are good picks, right? Like, if you do all that and they're all good picks, then I'm actually like going to probably support it to a certain degree. But I see some of these teams where like both quarterbacks are massively stacked with like 4 or 5 teammates, and they have bringbacks, and it's like you just totally stacked up 2 Week 17 games really heavily, and that team's just not going to advance, man. Like, you don't have enough exposure to the rest of the NFL for a full season advance rate. Like, it's not how fantasy football plays out. There's too much certainty, I think, in a lot of ways. There's too much there's not enough humility in other ways, right? It's hard to discuss, but one of the big keys as well is that so many of the things that we think we know about, even like the late round picks to add on to stacks right now, are wrong. So many of the things that we think we know in August become wrong by October. And certainly then the stuff that we think we know in June is just wrong. And so if you're like, this is a player that I'm throwing on because of a correlation, but I don't even know if he's going to play this year, he could be a huge zero, which a lot of like Leone's work has shown. It's about live players in Week 17. That's like the biggest thing. It's stronger than all the other stuff. It's stronger than correlation. You got to have live players. And the way he looked at it was players who scored more than 0 points, which can mean injury, but it can also mean you didn't draft bad players who got benched and weren't playing in Week 17. Like, this time last year, I was yelling about Van Jefferson, right? Like, Van Jefferson got benched. People wanted him as the late round Ram. He got benched and then he got traded. And I don't know if he was actually a nothing in Week 17 when he was on the Falcons. He actually scored in Week 17, but he didn't do anything with the Falcons. He never had more than 20 receiving yards, or he had 24 in one game. But, a tough season for him. He actually isn't a good example of the point I was trying to make, but there are players who get drafted who literally don't score, and it's not because they got injured. It's because they just weren't good enough. Like, I was drafting Zach Evans, to give another Ram example, and that's on me. I was drafting the rookie Zach Evans thinking he'd be the backup or win the backup job, and I'm pretty sure he didn't score anything in Week 17 because they didn't like him very, very much. They mostly were deactivating him last year because he couldn't help on special teams and all that stuff. But that's an example of, where I think you can run into some problems with the overcorrelation and stuff in the late rounds, is not being thoughtful about who the picks actually are. Kind of went through a lot of topics there, and I don't think that I articulated that particularly well. So I'm excited to go through your guys's comments here. I saw some good ones while I was talking through that. I kind of wanted to finish my thoughts, but we were talking about Trevor Lawrence a minute ago. He has a lower ADP than he did last year. He should improve. He's not a zero in the rushing category. He's easy to stack. Surprised he isn't going higher. Sean Siegel and I hit on this on the 3rd episode of our weekly Stealing Bananas recording yesterday. We recorded it all yesterday. Probably the first episode's out now, but you probably have to wait till the 3rd episode where I make a case that I think Trevor Lawrence is, somebody that we should be in on. I think he's a nice pick in the middle rounds. Getting to the stacking point, it's not as relevant to seasonal best ball, but the later 2020s is going to be a strange time for Dynasty, with years, pro, and player ages having abnormal disparities. Oh, that's just an interesting point about the Penix Knicks comments, how they're 24, how guys played 6 years of college. The pandemic really has changed the rookie evaluation for at this point. And yes, later it's going to change the evaluations for Dynasty. It's going to change a lot of things for this whole generation, my kids included. All these good running backs are about to fall off because of age in a year or so. I'm not quite sure where that one was in relation to. I've probably moved back too far. Remember to hit that like button. There's a good point. Subscribe, notifications, all of these things. Some comments from Austin here as I was talking through his team. It's definitely a thin needle to thread, from Nick Chrissa. But then again, so is coming in first place. It was definitely better last year when it was super unique, I think. I I believe this is probably in reference to when I was talking about doing the Eagles thing. Um, the idea that it was super unique is intriguing. The comment that is definitely a thin needle to thread is one that I would use in the counterpoint, because I think the reason people want to stack is they want to say I only have to get fewer things right. I only have to get this one team correctly, as opposed to trying to get the right pick in this offense and the right pick in this offense and all of those things. So I would actually use this point against you a little bit, not like, to win some argument, but this is the point that I would make about why we don't need to overstack in the early rounds. I get the uniqueness element, but also I think the reason people want to do that again is to minimize the things they have to get right. And it's such a thin needle to thread that I'm willing to take the risk that I get the best elite profiles put together on one build, as opposed to, this year the team is the Dolphins, and I've done a couple Tyreek Hill Achane builds. You could do Tyreek Achane Waddle because they're so concentrated. You could even talk yourself into that. I think it's wrong though. I did a couple Tyreek Achane ones, and I was like, I can't do that. And I want to be taking a lot of Waddle and Achane, so I actually have been really high on Tyreek. I've stopped taking him as much in the first 5 rounds. I noticed that my exposure to him in my post-draft stuff is a lot lower. I was taking him a lot more in the pre-draft stuff, and I took him a lot in the eliminator because I really like the consistency of his volume and the way McDaniel can get him touches in every game. Even when his snap shares are lower, then his targets per out run and his touches per snap basically are through the roof. He always gets volume. And I think that's really good in the eliminator for a first-round pick. I've taken him as high as 101 in that format. But it is tricky because the 2-3 turn, I want to be taking those Dolphins, and I don't want to stack up Tyreek and Waddle necessarily. That's not necessarily one, because for me, a big part of what makes Waddle such an appealing pick there is not only can he concentrate volume, but also if Tyreek were to miss time, Waddle to me immediately becomes the top 5 wide receiver. He has the most contingent upside of anyone. This was true last year. We talked about it. And when Tyreek missed one game, he got like 9 targets, 8 catches, 140 yards, and a TD, something like that. It was a fantastic line. And I think that very much validated the argument that if Tyreek were to miss time, Waddle's going to be an absolute smash again. And so I've loved the pairings where I get like Chase with Waddle, CeeDee Lamb with Waddle. It's like those two could both be top 3, top 5 wide receivers on the season. That's the thin needle that I want to thread, even though they're completely uncorrelated, because they're both really, really good players. It's not really like, it's an easier, when I have to get multiple things right, it's an easier thing to envision when I get a pick from the very best plays in fantasy football. Then late, I'll correlate where I can. I actually got some questions this week about why I said Jonnu Smith and Malik Washington were undraftable. Some interesting discussions in the YouTube chat around that. And that would be the counter, is like, that's the situation where maybe you should be throwing on a Jonnu Smith late to create the Dolphins correlation. I still have a tough time with those guys, because when McDaniel had like Tyreek out, he just went to Waddle and the backs. Like, he just goes to the guys he wants to go to. Malik Washington's 6th round pick. I was excited about Ezukama, Eric Ezukama. They drafted in the 4th round 2 years ago. He has like 6 touches in 2 years. Maybe Malik Washington's a bigger hit immediately, but as a 6th round pick, I think it's a really thin bet for him to get anywhere into this rotation that's meaningful, because they have they only give meaningful volume to like 3 or 4 guys. And even when those guys miss, it just concentrates on the others. And now Odell Beckham's there, right? So if something happens to Tyreek or Waddle, now Malik Washington has to probably wait for Odell Beckham to get some veteran deference for a little bit, and then move ahead of Beckham and get into the hierarchy, the group that gets all the volume. Now, if he got there, he would be an absolute smash. I just think the path for him to get there is really, really thin. And then same thing with Jonnu last year, career highs in targets and yards. This person that was commenting to me in the YouTube channel, or in the comments, was really high on Jonnu. I think if you go back and look at his career, like, it's hard to imagine that he's the one that consolidates volume. He thought Jonnu was such a better player than Durham Smythe and these guys that didn't consolidate behind the main guys last year, that they've been looking for someone to add. And I think that's an interesting interpretation. I'm not throwing that out, but Jonnu Smith hasn't been a guy who's consolidated volume really anywhere else. It's basically only Arthur Smith, or under Arthur Smith. He did well in Tennessee, and then Arthur Smith again used him last year. He signed the big deal in New England and did not get much volume. And last year he only had about 70 targets, 500 something yards. Like this, the comment, the chat I was having, the person was talking about Jonnu stealing volume from Pitts. And I think he did in some respects, but my two counters to that were I think they played completely different positions in Arthur Smith's offense. They're both tight ends for fantasy purposes, but they weren't the same player or the same position. And so the ways that Jonnu was getting design touches was because he's more of a certain type of tight end, and that's the way that Arthur Smith wanted that, that usage to go to that type of player. And then the second counterpoint that I would make is that Pitts still out targeted him by like 20 and had way more yards than him in a year while he was playing through injuries. And those were Jonnu's career highs last year. So Pitts, in both of the years where he's played more than 10 games, has had more targets, more yards. I just don't think that's really comparable in terms of like the type of player. Because I'm going to the Pitts thing because he in that chat that person made a comment that I was sort of like a Pitts fanboy, and it's like, I mean, the Pitts numbers are just better than the Jonnu numbers. Jonnu's just not as good as I think people want him to be. Last year was, again, the career highs. He's been in the league for 8 years, and Pitts has been this massive disappointment, but Pitts has stomped on him statistically if you actually look at what they've done in their seasons. Pitts isn't part of that discussion. I don't even know why Jonnu was a part of this discussion. Let's keep going through the chat. Moving up A.J. Brown last year was over like Kelsey, Hurt, Kupp, and Eckler. It was over Tyreek. It was over Chase, Jefferson, and CMC. You had to move him to like 103. Kupp got hurt. The top five, I'm not talking about Kelsey and Eckler. The top five was CMC, Chase, Jefferson, Tyreek, and Kupp. Yes, Jefferson and Kupp both got hurt, but like Tyreek Hill was an absolute smash at 105. I had a lot of Tyreek Hill last year. He was my best teams. I think you had to move him over Tyreek to do this. A lot of people were taking him ahead of Tyreek and Kupp. And yes, Kupp got hurt. But I mean, I think what Nakua did validated the point that was a different statistical ceiling. A.J. Brown had a great year, great first half, broke the record for 125-yard games consecutive. And then in the second half of the season, we saw why his situation wasn't conducive to the full season stat line of the other guys. He was good, but when I talked about him last year, I kept quoting Karain, who at one point said, A.J. Brown is like hitting a triple. Like we would talk about late round picks. Like sometimes you just want to hit a single, and A.J. Brown couldn't be a home run at that price, but he could be a triple in the late first round. And that was fine. It was a floor play. He's good, but the volume is going to cap it at a triple rather than a home run. The Kupp ceiling, the Tyreek Hill ceiling was higher in terms of what those offenses could mean for their actual volume. That type of stuff still matters for fantasy, man. People only think about the profile. I think A.J. Brown's the best receiver in the NFL. I freaking love him. He's been my banner on Twitter for like 5 years. Like, he's my favorite player in the NFL. But there is still, like, we still have to use math, and like the projection-based thinking actually is relevant when it comes to mobile quarterbacks and pass rate over expected and all of these elements that lead to actual volume in the offense. How concentrated can A.J. Brown be with all of the volume? Even though I think he's going to be the most efficient receiver in the NFL, he can't be a top 5 pick last year. Kupp, it was very much there for him. We saw it with Nakua, and it was there for him in the past with the Stafford and McVay offense. Tyreek Hill proved it until he got hurt. Tyreek Hill was the clear wide receiver 1 all season. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson have proved it in prior seasons, didn't necessarily have monster years last year. Christian McCaffrey is the other guy that would sometimes go 105, and you were taking A.J. Brown over. He was the RB1. Like, he was like, there's a different level of statistical. It's not just ceiling, it's floor, it's the range of outcomes. What's possible statistically is relevant. This is a discussion that plays so much into this year as well. And it's something that, again, I want to, it's another reason I love Jacob's article recently. He talked about how the 2024 drafting landscape is missing this point, and it's something I've been trying to articulate to you guys. Having played this thing for a really long time, Jacob put it in terms of that there's a lot of boosting of like archetypal and like certain specific profiles, but not paying enough attention to some of the just like stable, productive veterans that I don't want to be taking, but at a certain point, they're just way too good of values because people don't want to draft them, and they're overdrafting some of the like rookies, for example, that, I mean, no one remembers that Quentin Johnson sunk all their teams last year in the 8th round, but they want to take Ladd McConkey and Keon Coleman and Brian Thomas. These guys have question marks on their profiles, man. They're not elite wide receivers, and they have the same risk of massive bust that like there's going to be some rookies in the double-digit rounds that sink teams this year. Even in the years where we've had really strong rookie classes, you don't have a perfect hit rate, and a lot of them are going high. And that doesn't mean you avoid them all, because I'm absolutely somebody who wants to draft all the rookies. This is why I liked, again, Jacob's piece. He talks about, I'm still going to take those guys. I'm going to basically plug my nose and eat my vegetables and take them and have some exposure to them because they can be the guy you need. That's what matters with rookies. But some of them are overpriced, in my opinion. I think a lot of people are thinking they're going to get more stable volume out of rookies than you're going to get. You don't get volume out of rookies. Pat Kerrane showed this research a few years ago. Rookies tend to run fewer routes, and they hit on efficiency because they're good. They don't hit on volume. I've talked about this with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. When they were rookie hits, they were awesome. They're the two best rookie hits we've had recently, other than Puka Nacua last year. And both of them, Chase and Jefferson, added at least 2 targets per game in year 2 over year 1. They became even more of what they truly are now in year 2, because you can't start in year 1 and be the focal point of your offense and get, I mean, you can if you're Puka Nacua. You can get 160 targets as a rookie, but that's why Puka Nacua's season last year was so insane. Man, I'm off on some tangents this morning. But this is a great point. This AJ Brown discussion last year, why I thought that was so wrong to be pushing him up into the top 5 just for correlation, because it's missing a point about the range of outcomes, the actual volume, what these offenses are, what they can actually give you statistically, even the best players, even when they're efficient. I've talked about this with Brandon Ayuk this year in the second round. Brandon Ayuk had 105, 110 targets last year, hyper efficient, 3+ yards per target. I saw a stat the other day that he had the second best yards per target over X amount of targets in X, I don't know what the sample was, 10 years or whatever. His yards per target was so massive, 13 plus on the volume that he had. You can't have 100 targets and be that efficient. And yet, obviously, I've argued a ton of times that you don't just fade efficiency and say it's going to regress. Obviously, I want to be in on a player that good, but the volume is his ceiling. Can he get more volume? Does it require injuries to teammates? How does he get there? Because taking him in the second round when he just had the best season on a per route or per target basis that we can possibly imagine. 3+ yards per route run, like I said, 13+ yards per target. It's really hard to envision how he does any better than that, and how that actually doesn't come down some. I mean, like I don't love the concept of regression when you're just using it to hate on really good players, but it's probably going to come back in some way. It kind of has to. So the question is, can you get to 120, 130, 150 targets? Because a lot of these second round receivers can be 150, 160 target guys. Then that's a lot of volume gap to just be relying on the efficiency difference and you know, a ball-knowing opinion that Brandon Ayuk is a better receiver than whatever, Chris Olave, because he's been inefficient at times in his first 2 years. Chris Olave is going to see 45 more targets than Brandon Ayuk this year. I mean, are you that confident that Brandon Ayuk's going to run a 3+ yards per out run again, and Chris Olave can't be efficient? Because if Chris Olave is efficient, it doesn't even matter if Brandon Ayuk runs a 3+ yards per out run again. And by the way, Olave's been efficient. He's been over 2 yards per out run in both of the years of his career. It's just been not as efficient as people have wanted. I just think there's a lot of these types of mistakes being made in the current landscape. And so anyway, that's a rant I wanted to get off my chest. It's something I loved seeing worked into Jacob's article. Let's move on to some more comments that I'm way behind on the comments now. CD, mostly an end of first round pick all draft season last year. Not saying it was right, just how the market played it. This is in relation to this to GA's comment a few minutes ago about AJ Brown moving him up. CD's a guy who did have the type of ceiling in his offense that he wound up hitting. And I mean, I know I wrote about that. I wasn't super in on him as like the absolute best pick, and it was a little bit of a miss for me in that regard, but I know I wrote about there still being a lot of meat left on the bone for him statistically from what he had done the last couple of years. It's something that you will see if you actually, do projections or those types of things. Sacrilegious, what is up, buddy? This guy's incredibly sharp. Excited to read this. People are bad at appropriately weighting all the factors they need to consider during a draft: structure, week 17 correlation, player talent, evaluation, etc. Yeah, this gets to what I was trying to say. This is a really good summation of what I was trying to say, where like I in no way, and Sacrilegious gets that I'm in no way saying week 17 correlation's unimportant. He's wrote some great stuff on diversification. I tend to be a little bit more extreme in my exposures, and I've had some of you guys ask me about that. I think that's because I'm maybe a little bit like what I'm trying to leverage and where I think my edges are is more on the player specific level. It's also because I've played a lot of high stakes. I've had all my eggs in certain baskets where I've played, a lot of the times my season isn't based on this many drafts, right? It's based on like 10 high stakes teams, and I might have the same player on 5 of them. And then when that guy gets hurt, it sucks. But I'm used to that. I'm used to playing that way, and I've been doing it for years now. And so for me, my best ball portfolio is like one of those high stakes teams or a couple of them maybe, but having a really strong stance in best ball on certain players and being, willing to accept that I'm going to lose out on my best ball portfolio if those guys get really hurt or a big chunk of it. I mean, that sucks, but it's also something that fits with sort of the way that I've tended to play it. Anyway, this is just a whole unrelated topic about diversification, but I've been asked about it a few times, and Sacrilegious, being a guy who's written some great stuff about diversification, brought that to mind. But it's another thing to consider. And this is the point that he's making here. I don't want to go too far into the diversification point specifically, but the point that he is making here is that when people are on the clock and when they are thinking about things, they get so excited about week 17 correlation, for example. This is when I was making the point about over correlating week 17 and then sharing that on Twitter that you got everything all correlated. And it's like, okay, is your structure good? Was your player talent evaluation even a consideration, or were you just drafting guys that were on that team? Because you can't draft a freaking 8th receiver on the team that's not even going to make the 53-man roster. That is important. That's the other thing that he doesn't list here, Sacrilegious, on screen, but you can't have dead roster spots. That was the other thing we were talking about. Are You Afraid of the Light says, how should they weigh those factors? It's variable, right? It takes a little bit of everything. My point is don't overemphasize one thing. And I think it's probably Sacrilegious's point as well. People get really hung up on that one thing. They go through a period where like, I really want to target this one week 17 matchup. I'm super into it. Or I'm super into this one late round pick, and they drafted in every single pick and in every single draft. And that's when you're not diversifying enough. That's when the player talent evaluation point that he brings up is now being pressed too far. You need to have some humility. You can't be certain that your late round pick is right and be 80% exposed to that guy, because then 80% of your drafts might not have anything in the late rounds, because any of those late round picks you can be wrong on, I promise. So it's the hyper fixation on, in terms of this question from Are You Afraid of the Light of how should they weigh those factors? There's so many factors that people get overwhelmed, and then they hyperfixate on individual factors. And I do think this is the thing that the very best drafters do well. This is the common thread you'll see from Pete and Pat and those guys who I think build incredible teams consistently. Justin Herzig has had teams in the Best Ball Mania finals repeatedly. I believe that he does all of these things, or he understands how to properly weight a myriad of things as he builds his teams and not get hyperfixated on one or the other. And a lot of times I completely disagree with Herzig's player takes and stuff, but I have a really hard time poking holes in the ways that he builds any of the teams of his that I see. And that's it. I think a huge compliment. I would hope that if he heard that, he would take it as a compliment. That, I mean, even if I completely disagree on some player takes, I'm constantly like, this guy knows how to build fantasy teams. He understands structure. He understands how to layer in correlation, when to take a stance on a player talent evaluation type of decision, right? When in a build, he has enough correlation, but he doesn't have enough upside at the running back position. This is why I say it's all variable, because it can happen within a draft. You've taken too many sort of boring players. And that was one of the other things in Jacob's article. He talks through some of these boring values, but he also, this is the one minor thing that I would sort of want to talk to Jacob about and kind of, I guess, not push back on, but push back on. He has a really great section where he says he only has 18 opportunities to pick the difference making players. And we've talked about this over the years. You want upside, you want to target the guys that actually move the needle. It's not about getting 18 small wins. It's about getting like 3 or 4 big wins. And that's how your team's good. That's what works in fantasy football. It's just the reality of it. He says he has 18 opportunities to pull those levers, so he wants to be targeting the smashes, the guys that can be huge hits, full season hits, important, right? Not just guys that could have 1 week spike potential, but full season hits, guys that can define his team and also provide back-weighted production and 1 week spike potential. The minor pushback I would have is in best ball. That's how I play redraft. In best ball, I've had to come around to the idea that sometimes you do have to take the small wins or the medium wins. And I actually think Jacob talks about those types of players, so it's a little bit contradictory. This is why I'd say I want to talk to him about it, because he talks about taking those small win or medium win type players in some spots where they just get too cheap, and you have to be willing to take some of them. Like one of the guys that Sean and I talked about yesterday, we also talked about the Giants. I got to realizing that Devin Singletary at pick 110 is somebody I'm not taking him because I'm taking so much Javonte Williams and Chase Brown and other running backs in that range that I want to take. But I feel really confident that Devin Singletary, especially with all this stuff about Tyrone Tracy not really being right, and Eric Gray's the guy they want to work into the number 2 role. Eric Gray, we talk about it on the show. Go listen to the show. Eric Gray's not an NFL player. He didn't test as an NFL player. He was extremely poor on his opportunities last year. Very limited, but just didn't show anything to change any. He's a 5th round pick that is, probably a college running back. He ran a 4.62. He's not an athlete. He's not big to be a non-athlete. I'm not trying to dog this guy, but I obviously am dogging him. That's why I'm still comfortable with Tyrone Tracy, even as he's losing ADP value, because somebody's got to play the number 2 role. And I feel confident it's not going to be Eric Gray. Maybe I'm hyper confident. That's a similar thing to what I had an issue with Kyren Williams last year, but I talked to Sean about that specific point as well. And Sean talked to me about how there was some good underlying prospect metrics in Kyron's profile. If you really dug into it, some of the forced missed tackles, some of that stuff. And while we were talking, he goes and looks up some of the Eric Gray stuff. And he's like, yeah, it's just not there for Eric Gray. It's not there in college either. There's not any of this surprisingly interesting agility or anything in his production metrics. But Devin Singletary is the dude that played under Brian Dable at Buffalo for multiple seasons. They signed him to a contract where he has a lot of guaranteed money into next year, even $9.5 million guaranteed. I didn't even realize how strong his contract was. I know people hate the contract talk, but if you sign Devin Singletary to enough guaranteed that it carries over into next year, and you're probably not cutting him in 2025, and then you also don't add anything in the backfield behind him. And your head coach was his offensive coordinator for the first 3 years of his career and consistently played him as the main back in a committee. And I think they will use a committee. And I think Tyrone Tracy might play a lot in the committee. But Devin Singletary, I said to Sean, if he was going the 5th, 6th round like he would have 5+ years ago, he would have been a traditional dead zone back, and I would have avoided it because he would have not had a strong enough moat around him, and he could have lost his job to a better running back if somebody came along. Who knows who that could be, because there's no one else really to threaten on the roster unless Tyrone Tracy's that guy. And yet, if he's at pick 110, I feel pretty confident that even though he's not going to be a high ceiling player, that he's going to be a plus win rate player there. And I'm building a lot of 0 RB teams. I got to be willing to take that pick occasionally. So when I was going back to Jacob's point about the 18 high upside opportunities to hit something in best ball, a running back at ADP 110 that I feel confident, as long as he stays healthy, is going to support a 0 RB build with volume all year, because there's no one to threaten him. He knows the offense. They paid him like it. They brought him in. That's a pick that's worth making in best ball, because I don't get to cut and add other running back options throughout the year. I only get these picks. And so I don't know that I have to make the pure upside pick in all 18. I think that's a mistake that I made in the past. And I've gotten used to making some boring picks, but about 4, right? It's 14 upside picks and 4 boring picks. That's the max, right? But the point I was making about people that weigh this stuff correctly gets back to, for those of you who say how to weigh those factors, if I take a Devin Singletary, then the factor that I need to weigh in the late rounds is a ceiling play, is a big swing at running back, because that's the texture that my roster needs. I have floor. Now I need a true handcuff that I think has the potential to really dominate a backfield if they get the opportunity. Maybe even Bucky Irving's my highest rostered player. We looked at my exposure recently. That's the guy that comes to mind. Late round running back. I think is the pretty clear number 2. They're already talking about how he hits the hole so explosively. And I joked to Sean, that's what you say when Rachaad White's the other back that you're watching in practice, because Rachaad White's whole issue is he stands in the backfield for 20 minutes. Yeah, I know his blocking's bad, but this dude does not hit holes like that. I wrote about it in Ceiling Signals every single week last year. That's why he has a 3.6 yards per carry average over both seasons of his career. Yes, Rachaad White can catch, but I'm also pretty confident, and I know we can't be too confident in running back skill, but I'm pretty confident Rachaad White's not a very good running back in terms of rushing. And so if Bucky Irving is already getting this praise about hitting holes quickly and that kind of stuff, I think he could take some of the rushing work by midseason just because he looks more explosive as a runner, and it's that obvious. And then if that's the case, does he start to take some of the receiving work too? Because he was a good receiver in college. Suddenly it's like, why are we even putting Rachaad White? We have to make an effort to put Rachaad White on the field. I'm not saying he's going to take Rachaad White's job, but I am saying Rachaad White's a little bit of a fragile profile when you actually have another talented back in your backfield, which he didn't have last year. And Bucky Irving is my favorite late round running back for that exact reason, because I don't think he has a lot of competition for the RB2 job. And that's the type of ceiling that I would weigh in the late round, regardless of correlation. I don't care if I have a Carolina or Tampa Bay play. I want to be now player talent evaluation focused. I need upside at running back. Devin Singletary is not going to give me spike weeks. He's more of an advance rate player. I know he's going to be a medium win player. When I have a player like him, or some of my builds might have a couple players like him, where I don't know if I have enough ceiling, then I need, regardless of correlation or whatever, I need to find ceiling late to finish that build. Those are the considerations that are actually dynamic throughout a draft. You have to be able to consider changing environments and those types of things. I've been on this topic for a really long time. The view count is dropping. I hope those of you who are actually following me are enjoying it. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. There's some other questions. Thoughts on Jaden Daniels, your starting QB. What's the argument for Richardson over Jaden Daniels? We've talked about this on recent shows. I would recommend going back and looking through some of those. There's one that has a thumbnail that I put Jaden Daniels on. We spun the wheel. I've had some questions about when we spin the wheel, if I could timestamp those. I'm going to get timestamps going. I know you guys like the team discussions, but if you go to the YouTube and just scroll through, you can see when I pull up Pro Football Reference pages and those things. Those will be good indications of when we have spun the wheel and we're doing that kind of stuff, or I'm on some kind of rant, whatever. But you'll be able to find it fairly easy by scrolling through and looking at what I've pulled up. Because when I've pulled up, the draft board, like I have for most of these drafts, or most of these streams, I usually just have Underdog up. Obviously, then we're making picks. When I pull up Pro Football Reference, some of those other pages, we talk about the teams. We spin the wheel. We talk about specific teams. We did that, and we got Washington just a couple of shows ago. I put Jaden Daniels on the thumbnail for that episode. You should be able to find that discussion fairly quickly if you're interested. Nick said he 100% agrees. I was making the point that that you think it's even worse this year. Appreciate that note. What's your opinion on stacking in redraft? Fully opposed or just less so the best ball? I find the eliminator format to have similar logic to season-long redraft. I don't think I find the eliminator format to have the same logic. Similar. I don't have a huge issue with team stacking in redraft because you can churn the waiver wire, especially late. Like if you want to make a huge bet on a specific offense in redraft to be like the offense for that year, I've heard of people doing that kind of thing and having a lot of success. And then the pieces that didn't hit, you can just cut and replace. And you can wind up with like a big bet on, like if you did it with Houston last year and you were correct, you would have Stroud, you'd have Nico, you'd have Tank late. You'd also have Robert Woods late. Eventually you cut Robert Woods and you're left with the meat of the offense and who actually hit. You might have both Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary, or maybe you just took Singletary as the backup, but you hit on that as well. I don't think that's a crazy thing in redraft. But we're mostly talking best ball here. Pitt's numbers are better. Okay, yeah, I'm still like I do this. I'm way behind. That's it, Gretch. Look us in the eye as you vamp while slow drafting. I made it a point to look at the camera a little bit there. Appreciate that you guys felt like I was looking into your souls, or at least Sun did. It's also why this year's Puka is a wild thing to be searching for. Yep, on the nose there. As a fellow member of Slow Draft Hell, really appreciate the strategy talk pick by pick. That's a fun stuff. On Sacrilegious, this is always going to be good, right? Read the diversification stuff. I think people assume that I'm a flat exposure bro. Out of all drafters in BBM4, I had the 10th most exposure to Breece Hall at 31.3%. Multiple guys over 30% this year. Thank you. That's exactly where I would describe my. I mean, I think that's where my exposures are. I think I have 3 guys over 30% right now. So it's multiple guys over 30%, but it's not 10. I'm not going freaking crazy. And having Breece Hall at 31.3% last year is, I think I was in that range on him. Jaylen Warren was my highest rostered guy last year, and I think I was in that range on him. What's your opinion on stacking redraft? Oh, that is that the same? Yeah, it's the same person, same question. Austin says, Gretch, how do you dial it back on ownership on these late round flyers? I just like everyone in the 17th, 18th, and just own 20% plus on Rasheen Ali, Zay Jones, Rondale Moore, etc. Who do you like in the 17th, 18th? This is a fun question. My answer on how to dial it back is for me to tell you that Rasheen Ali, Zay Jones, and Rondale Jones all suck, and they're all going to be bad. Like, you have convinced yourself they're going to be good. I'm actually really in on Rondale Jones and half in on Zay Jones. I have not drafted Rasheen Ali. He's the one I can make the case against the easiest. Justice Hill has been there forever, knows the offense, and he's actually going to play ahead of Ali. And then Ali's like a 5th-round pick. And then Keaton Mitchell, once I know he's rehabbing from the ACL, and everyone's acting like he's not going to play all year, but it was a clean tear. And I actually think that's going to all get positive on him, and he's going to be back by like week 8, and Ali's going to be the 4th running back on that depth chart. I honestly don't think Rasheen Ali is draftable, and maybe that's way too much certainty on my end, but I think Justice Hill will play ahead of him because they like the veterans. Whenever their starter has been hurt the last few years, they think about running back as a high floor position. It's kind of similar to what the Rams did last year, and he would be the Zach Evans, where they didn't want to put Zach Evans out there because he didn't understand the role as the rookie. And instead, the guys they did put out there were bad, but they went and signed Darrell Henderson off the street because he knew the offense, and they took Royce Freeman off the practice squad and played those guys when Kyron Williams went on IR. That's the stuff that the Ravens have done for years. They signed Devonta Freeman. They signed Latavius Murray. They signed Le'Veon Bell that one year, and they've played these guys over interesting young players. Like the Tyson Williams had that one good game, but he missed one pass block rep, and they didn't play him again, right? They just deactivated him for worse players because those guys did the little things because their offense is about protecting Lamar and about the receivers and Lamar, right? They're an analytics forward team. Derrick Henry goes down. Rasheen Ali has a chance if he's good and if he earns it, right? But I don't think his draft profile wasn't even that strong, and he was a 5th-round pick. And I think he plays special teams. I think part of the reason they brought him in was maybe special teams. They like Keaton Mitchell. They talked about Keaton Mitchell big time all last year, and they played him already. They already got him on the field and showed that he did enough that they wanted him incorporated. Then he tears his ACL. But I think there's a good chance once he's healthy, he's in the circle of trust. And Justice Hill is definitely in the circle of trust. I think Ali's a really thin bet. Again, this is just me saying that, like, I'm not trying to hammer you or anything, but I'm trying to say, like, there's a counter to all of these late round guys. Rondale Moore too. I've been having to check myself on Rondale Moore. I like him a lot, but I'm all excited about they're going to use him on motion to get free releases like they did with Tutu Atwell and the Rams last year. Zach Robinson came over from the Rams. He was the pass game coordinator for the Rams last year. He's now the OC for Moore. They got him in a trade, although he was just sort of a throw-in because they were just trading away Desmond Ridder, and the Cardinals were happy to kind of get rid of Moore. It was two, change of scenery players. But having said that, like, I like the Moore profile, and they concentrate things in their 11 personnel and all of those types of things. But the counter is like, dude, they're probably only going to play him like 40, 50% of the snaps because he's not actually going to be able to stay out there to run block. He's too small. They're going to play Darnell Mooney, and they're going to play Kyle Pitts at receiver and Drake London, and that's going to be their 11 personnel. And then they'll have another tight end as sort of their blocking tight end. Whoever, I mean, they don't have Jonnu anymore, but their second tight end's like Parker Hesse or something like that. I'm going to look it up because now it's bothering me. Charlie Warner is their second tight end. They're going to play too much Charlie Warner or Ross Dwelly, two former 49ers that, the Shanahan McVay stuff is, sort of familiar with each other. And Probably they brought in those 49ers backups to do certain types of things alongside Pitts, who can then flex out. And I mean, if I was them, I would be probably putting a second tight end on the field with Pitts because they don't like to substitute, but having Pitts out there. So it's 11 personnel when Pitts is playing receiver. And then on the next snap, Pitts comes into the line and now you have a heavy 2 tight end personnel and you can run. So Pitts can snap to snap without substituting and not allowing the defense to substitute. You can go from 2 tight end to 3 receiver personnel. You can use Pitts' versatility that way, which would then mean Rondale Moore is not on the field very much, right? He's only on the field in obvious passing situations late in the game where they get him, out in the slot and they get to a 3 receiver set with Pitts, and it's just like a 4 receiver set basically. And so Rondale only winds up playing 40 to 50% of the snaps. It's a concern. Zay Jones, what if he just gets beat up by Michael Wilson? What if he gets cut? He could get cut. So, I mean, I just like everyone in those rounds too. Who do I like in the 17th and 18th? I mean, I think this is a fair question that, oh, look at this. We're on Underdog. Let's go to rankings. NFL. Let's just scroll down and I'll just go through. You guys have seen me make some picks in these rounds, but I mean, I talked about Tyrone Tracy still being willing to take him. Actually, let's just go position by position. It'll be a little easier. Guys I'm actually taking in the very, very late rounds. Braylon Allen I've started to get interested in, but he's rising a little bit. J.K. Dobbins a little. I've taken some Roschon Johnson. Both the Chicago guys, Khalil Herbert and Roschon, I think are interesting. They get pushed down because we don't know who the backup really is, but they're both good players. And DeAndre Swift has had a hard time staying healthy. I think it's a good offense. I draft all 3 of the Bears running backs, man, because they're all reasonably cheap. If one of them got significantly more expensive, I wouldn't draft that one anymore. Dameon Pierce, I haven't actually clicked on a lot, but I think is draftable. Both Elijah Mitchell and probably Isaac Guerrero are draftable. Keaton Mitchell, I've taken a little bit. Down here, it gets tricky, but the one way down here, you're taking Ali. The one way down here for me is Blake Watson from Denver because I love the pass catching for the Broncos. On the receiver side, in the very, very late rounds, Wan'Dale is not that late, but when I can get him, Luke McCaffrey, Demarcus Robinson, I draft more than I should have because they play such heavy 11 personnel, and I feel confident they want him out there for run blocking. He's going to play. He's going to run a lot of routes. He's one of those small win or medium win players, but he's so cheap that I do feel confident that he brings something to a build as long as I have enough wide receiver upside already. Then I can throw him on the back of that build. Again, the texture of the wide receiver room is relevant. If it's a bunch of boring routes runners, then I don't need Robinson. I need a Luke McCaffrey. I need more of a ceiling play. Zay Jones, I can understand. Devontae Walker, though, is a ceiling play that I like here. I got to take more Jalen McMillan for sure. I've taken a lot of DJ Chark just because that's pretty wide open and he's a cheap way to try to buy some routes. And for the Chargers, Justin Herbert's a good quarterback. Skill set wise, they fit. Deep threat. Herbert's a good deep ball thrower. Rondale Moore, definitely taking a lot of him. That's sort of it. I don't think I've gone down much further here. I just think you want to try to vary it as much as you can. That was the point on me saying that, the guys that you have been drafting suck. They don't actually suck, but I think you want to vary it, and you got to convince yourself that these guys aren't as good of plays as you think they are. And then to balance out those exposures, like one of the things Corain used to talk about doing is he would draft the ones that he likes for a couple weeks, and then he would just tell himself not to draft them anymore. And then for the next couple weeks, get infatuated with another late round pick and draft that guy a bunch, and then don't draft him anymore. And that's going to naturally diversify over the course of draft season, where you're going to be back down to like 10% on these guys if you just stop drafting them for a while. I think an underrated, undercovered thing is how so much content is BBM centric, but like you would draft someone different in single 3 max, other lower entry fields too, different considerations. Anyway, it's a good point. I try to talk through some of the other other formats. We've obviously talked about Eliminator and some of those. I'm on the clock in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we started. I was on the clock in 5. I'm an hour and 20 minutes in, and I've made one pick, and we're now on the clock in 9. I was worried that we weren't going to be on the clock in enough formats, but we are. CJ Stroud will lead the league in passing yards. Strong take here from Ryan. You're starting to sweat about Javonte Williams or just FUD. I have a lot of Javonte. Will probably get more, but still mix McLaughlin. I'll tell you what I'm not doing is I'm not getting too worried about McLaughlin, who I do like, but We talked about this. He's a 5'8", 187-pound back. He's explosive, and that's exciting. And I do think he could be good. But in terms of like every down usage, like the point that I've tried to drive home to you guys is they didn't even use him heavily after he broke out last year. I sometimes do this. I go to Pro Football Reference. I want to show you guys the snap rates last year. Offensive snaps, this column over here on the far right almost. He breaks out in week 4. The role is kind of a breakout role in week 4. That's the first week he goes over in the rushing column, goes 7 for 72, over 10 yards per carry, and he catches a TD. That was his huge game, week 4. 33% of the snaps that game. He literally only played one game the rest of the year where he had a higher snap percentage, and that was 2 weeks later. The next week he played a good amount. He had another receiving TD. The next week after that, he played 40% of the snaps. And I'll point out, it was only 21 total snaps. Denver just ran fewer snaps in a game where they only scored 8 points. He never played more than 21 snaps in a game, which is a very small amount. The average game is like 60 offensive snaps, 56, or maybe it's like 63. It's somewhere in that range. So this game where he played 40% at 20, they were down at like 50 snaps, which is it's a very low number. It's not common. And to be at 20%, you're talking about a third of the snaps max. But my point is, he was at 20 snaps per game in weeks 5 and 6, and then he wasn't anymore. They still used him as an explosive player down the stretch. He got 6 touches in week 16, 8 touches in week 17, or rushes. He got 10 touches and 11 touches. His volume was actually okay in terms of the touches for a rotational player. But my point is, he got 10 touches on 17 snaps. He got 11 touches on 19 snaps, which is good that he was getting so many touches per snap, but you're not going to see that scale. They see his limitations. He's small. They can't play him in other situations. They play him when they get him out there for, splash touches and things like that. It's the way the Cowboys used to use Tony Pollard behind Zeke, but Pollard's not as small as him. It's a really high touch per snap rate, which is a good thing in terms of them liking his talent and wanting to get him the ball, but it's a bad thing in terms of how you can envision him taking over a backfield, because they're telling you that they like him, but they also can't envision playing him much. And as you see with the snap shares that I've highlighted here, weeks 4, 5, 6, he's at 33% to 40%. Then he goes 17%, 11, 15, 15, 3, 15, 19, 13. He doesn't play 20% or more for 8 straight weeks after that. Down the stretch, he does have a game at 25%, 28%, finishes the year at 15%. I mean, it's cool to see, but I really don't see a lot of scenarios where he's playing more than a third of the snaps, which, I mean, Javonte Williams is not going to be an every down player anyway. You're not trying to get that right. Tracy's been getting some good press. I saw that too. I was excited about that. Agree with Alex. He says, no way Singletary's a 300 pick, touchback, but he's a good pick regardless. What's up, Fantasy Football Garage? Swift's chances of being an RB1 this year, I think they're higher than his ADP suggests, honestly. I mean, I think he got paid a ton of money. Everyone is confident that he sucks and is bad at football. And I mean, he was formerly a pretty highly thought of prospect. He has a very boom-bust rushing profile, but the booms were there a lot with the Lions. We used to really like this guy when the booms hit more. The thing with boom-bust, like explosive, high-efficiency type players that do have some misses, is when they stack, it's all about the rate of the booms. When they stack the booms, then everyone thinks they're like amazing because they're scoring long touchdowns constantly. Like Jaleel McLaughlin. Everyone thinks he's amazing because he had so many big explosive plays last year on a rate basis per touch. And Swift was like this early in his career. And it's just like, give him more volume. He's so good. But then as soon as they have it's probably just variance, but they have a longer stretch where they don't explode as much. Now, in Swift's case, he refused to try to run through contact at the second level last year, which drove me nuts. He would just like fall down in front of safeties instead of trying to run through it. But when they stop hitting and they start stacking the low success rate plays, they get stuffed a bunch, then suddenly they're just bad, right? Because their success rate's not good and they haven't hit on any booms, and so they're bad. But this is a player who has shown us not just the boom ability in the run game, but also in the receiving game while he was in Detroit. He's had a lot of explosive plays, and actually he had like a 4.6 yards per carry last year because he had some explosive plays last year. It just wasn't as good as we expected. We thought it could be a 5+ yards per carry in this offense where Miles Sanders had a 5+ yards per carry the year prior, and that Swift was maybe even a bigger boom bust type runner. He could maybe be at a 5.5, maybe a 6 yards per carry. Like that was the thought on what Swift could be. And so 4.6, while good, felt bad. But then all of a sudden he's bad. We think he's bad because he didn't do it consistently enough. And so, I mean, again, if he's still the player at all that he was in Detroit or as a prospect coming out, and he's not that old, he was a really young prospect. He's gonna get more high value touches. He's gonna get more catches. He's gonna get more goal line work. Not because he's definitely gonna get goal line work with the Bears, because he might not. Roshan Johnson might get it. He's a bigger back. Maybe Khalil Herbert gets it. He's a better runner between the tackles. Again, boom bust runners don't always get goal line work, but he didn't get any last year. It was all tush pushes. Jalen Hurts got 15 rushing TDs. That's not true. Swift did get a lot of rushing value in close last year. He got tackled at the one a bunch of times, which was just maddening. But he didn't have many rushing TDs. You'd think he'd be able to convert a little bit more this year just based on some, luck, but certainly would catch more passes in this offense. And the reason I think he might get more goal line work as well is a rookie quarterback, those teams tend to run in close at a high rate. And so, I just think you're not going to press Caleb Williams to throw a ton inside the 5 into traffic, although you have really good receivers. So maybe they will do that. I don't know. But I think Swift has some potential to be an upside play and be the main back in a way that everyone in the fantasy community just thinks he's bad now. I had another example when I was talking about these boom bust guys that people just think are bad once they stop booming. And in my head, I was going to get to after I, got the other point out, and I forgot the player that I was going to circle back to. At one point, I did think of Devon Achane just because I can't believe that guy averaged 7.8 yards per carry last year. Me and Sean are talking about him too. It's just, he only had 100 carries, but that's an example of when the booms all hit at once. Like you look unstoppable. You look absolutely incredible. I was also thinking of Jamal Charles at one point. He's a boom bust runner that, I don't know that he was a boom bust runner. I don't know if his success rate was actually bad, but the point I'm making about him is the booms were hitting, and they hit in a massive way throughout most of his career. And he was always super efficient because of those huge, big plays. There was another good sort of point I wanted to make about like a boom busty profile and why it's sometimes worth buying back into once it gets cheap again. There's another player that's gotten cheap. I don't know. Maybe it'll come to me later. I just saw Tony Pollard on my screen here. And he's an example of one where the booms just went away, right? And then now he sucks again. But I'm not saying I want to be in on him. I'm wondering if I can find. It's going to drive me mad. Oh, well. Hey, Steph, how you doing? I'm just kind of looking through. I'm still so far behind. Steph doesn't need any Justice Hill hype, please and thank you. Angus says, I always do 0 RB in redraft and best ball. Is Bijan worth breaking that pattern? I think 0 RB is a pretty strong way to go this year, but I also think Bijan is an abnormally strong legendary upside swing. So, I think, is he worth breaking that pattern? Yeah, if the price is right, I think he's worth it. And if like it comes to you in that kind of way. But I also think it's a good year for 0 RB. Especially though in home leagues, like I would probably want to take Bijan because I feel like I can do a better job getting receiver depth in a home league than I will like on Underdog. This is a good one from Who Hames. I started to look for week 17 matchups to stop picking the same people around 17 to 18. If you're having a diversification issue late rounds, then correlation can be your friend. Remember, we're talking about you want to layer in all these things. It can help you get off that can naturally accomplish 2 goals. You're starting to correlate better and you're starting to diversify better. That's a great point. this again, don't get too fixated on one thing. This was like I went on a whole freaking rant about this earlier, but um, this is a great little way to make sure you're doing that. Alex P. Keaton with a good thought here. If Zay Jones is hitting your lineup, your early receivers aren't hitting, which is a concern, and you potentially missed on a late running back. This is, I don't think it has to be this specific, and I don't think he's trying to make it this specific, but it is the way to think about it, right? In most cases, a really boring late receiver, I mean, this could relate to my Demarcus Robinson points as well, is an issue because it means you don't have enough receiver upside early that aren't hitting. And you would prefer to be taking a guy late, a late running back, as he references, that could be a huge smash. Or if you're going to take a receiver, you take one that has the potential to be a huge hit as well, which Zay Jones isn't going to be at this stage of his career. But, this year's Puka Nacua, like, you can make that case if it would be a rookie, right? It would be a young player breaking out for the first time. Maybe it's a year 2 thing. Yeah. Chipsy's counterpoint is Sean Payton hates him and he's added 4 running backs since he took over. I mean, this is about Javonte? Perhaps? Because they added Jaleel last year after Sean Payton had taken over. I wouldn't read it that way. Sean Payton has always valued running back depth. He's done that in New Orleans for a long time. And the 4 running backs that they've added are a journeyman backup in Samaje Perine, 2 UDFAs, and a round 5 guy in Audric Estime. I mean, you're not going to adding a bunch of depth because from an organizational perspective, you think the running backs don't matter position is churnable. Doesn't tell me that you're out on the guy that, formerly had 2nd round draft capital. I'm not saying that means you're in on him, but they didn't take a high-end running back is the point that I'm trying to make. Took a 5th rounder and 2 UDFAs and signed Samaje Perine. Didn't Swift get Miles Sanders to Carolina money? I'm going to come at Chipsy again because he has a lot of smart comments in a lot of these. But what happened with Miles Sanders in Carolina is it's kind of the same thing as we're going to find this year's Puka. Okay, let's all just pattern match the Miles Sanders to Carolina. I've seen this point made a lot. It's not Chipsy that's the only one that's made it. But teams don't give guys 2-year deals with a bunch of second-year money and then bench him in year 1 because they get in the situation that the Carolinas in this offseason where they have all this dead money to Miles Sanders, would probably prefer to cut him, but can't. They decided to move on with Jonathan Brooks. They have a whole new regime in place. They fired everybody. They have a new head coach, everything else. But Miles Sanders is going to be on the roster this year. He's going to have to play some. They don't want him in the building right now. I can guarantee you that. It's not. They want to be moving forward with Jonathan Brooks and with a different attitudes. Sanders is not going to be the right presence on your young locker room and all of that stuff. Maybe he is, but I'm not trying to attack Miles Sanders. But I think when teams give the guarantees over multiple years, we can point to counter examples of anything in football. This is a good counter example. Miles Sanders has a ton of guaranteed money. He's uncuttable. He still got benched in his first year. I get it. But that's the exception, not the rule. DeAndre Swift getting that money this year doesn't mean the exact same thing's going to happen. And DeAndre Swift, by the way, was a better prospect. He was more widely respected early in his career with the Lions than Miles Sanders ever was. Drafted higher in fantasy leagues than Miles Sanders ever was. Miles Sanders got up there at certain points, but we're all just kind of, it's just pattern matching to me. We're all just sort of pattern matching and saying he's going to be the new Miles Sanders because that's what happened when Miles Sanders left Philadelphia. I think my main point on why the pattern doesn't fit is that what happened with Miles Sanders getting benched in year 1 of a multi-year guarantee type free agent deal is rare. Free agents don't typically get benched in year 1. Their coach got fired. Everything went crazy for Carolina last year. Also, Carolina's offense sucked. DeAndre Swift's going to a good offense. That's a big part of the point. It's easier to have a floor of running back production that doesn't get you benched when the running back doesn't suck. The offense doesn't suck. I think I'll stick to my, longer term reading of these types of contracts, I do think it's relevant personally. So it's going to see a lot of light boxes, says Nick. That's something that I do expect. Ooh, Code Blue's with me. We're piling on. He says people calling Swift Miles Sanders are just using lazy brain. I mean, I really do. I think it's pattern matching, and it's not the relevant same thing. Miles Sanders also was a terrible receiver for over multiple years. Like, he wasn't a 3-down guy, and they were talking about how they're going to make him a 3-down guy in the offseason. Like, Carolina doesn't know what they're doing. In the offseason, there was that video of them meeting with Miles Sanders, and they were like, you're going to catch so many passes like early in your career. That's what Deuce Staley's been telling us. They brought in Deuce Staley. And then you go look at Miles Sanders receiving, and you're like, this dude's been bad. Like, his first year, he was okay as a receiver. And then, like, really legitimately horrible efficiency as a receiver 4 years straight after that. Like, really bad yards per target, yards per reception, all of that. Just not a good player in space. DeAndre Swift is a 3-down player who's always been good as a receiver, not like elite. And he was a little bit down last year as I'm looking at it, but 3 straight years in Detroit was a really, like, solid receiver that would get into space and make explosive plays, had 350 plus receiving yards all 3 years. Miles Sanders didn't have more than 200 receiving yards for 3 straight years after he went to Carolina. I mean, it's just a different player in terms of we got these guys. Chipsy said that's not what he did. He says, okay, so Chipsy's got some more thoughts here. Just always push back on the fall the money takes from free agency. Swift got 2 years, 16 milli essentially. I would push back on he got a big contract. Same logic was what people said with Miles. So I'm not saying he got a big contract. He got 2 years, 16 milli essentially. Got 14 million fully guaranteed. The part of it for me, and this is a good thing to break down, because I do think people overrate the contract stuff sometimes. Swift's full guarantee includes 6.1 million of his 2025 base salary, which is 7.4 million. So almost all of that's the total base salary, 7.4. 6.1 of it is fully guaranteed. He also has prorated signing bonuses into next year, which makes his dead money into next year. It's almost 9 million. It's 8.7 million. If he was a post June 1 cut, 1.3 million of that would push into 2026. So they'd have 7.5 dead million on next year's cap, but there's 8 plus almost 9 million tied to him beyond this year. That's similar to the Miles Sanders thing in the regard of there's a lot of dead money there. Even if they tried to cut him, I mean, they actually have more dead money that was in this year, which is what they do in these contracts to lower the cap number in year one. But it also means you're stuck with the guy in the building that you don't want anymore. I think it's a big reason why, for example, the Cowboys didn't get rid of or stop using Ezekiel Elliott until the final year of his contract. I use contract stuff to predict pretty favorably when Tony Pollard would actually have a chance to take over midseason from Zeke a little bit more of the work before the 2023 season. And that was like very correct because they know that they don't have an offseason problem at that point. They're going to cut him. I use the contract stuff to explain that Russell Wilson was going to be cut and probably benched in season in 2023. Because you can see what the team is going to think internally throughout the year. And that's why I'm concerned about the Daniel Jones stuff that's been brought to my attention as well. But yes, I agree that the contract stuff can be used incorrectly. I just think the Miles Sanders thing is like a really unique case where they benched a dude even though they were definitely tied to him the next year. And it was in part because they fired the coach in season. They brought in an interim coach. That interim coach benched the player. It's a situation that I don't expect to see in Chicago. And I don't think you'll find many similar cases to Miles that you could make a bigger sample argument that players get these 2-year deals with a lot of guaranteed money into the second year and then get benched right away for bad play. I mean, I think the teams are incentivized by they're the ones that paid the money. Like, we can say that we don't think Swift's worth the money, but they do. They went and paid him a bunch of money. Like, that's the important thing, is it's very similar to why draft capital matters so much. The teams that are doling out the draft capital are the ones that are making the decisions on who plays in camp, in practices, in preseason, and then in the season. They play first-round picks who suck. If Quentin Johnson was a 5th-round pick, he wouldn't have played as much as he did last year. They kept playing him because he was their first round pick. They needed to be right. It's the same thing with the contract stuff in some cases, not in every case. I do agree with that. Gypsy, I'm always behind, but he says I'm cooking in chat. I'm ready for Gretch to get me though, and now I'm getting to that comment when I'm like 10 minutes behind. Already cooking, Gypsy, but maybe I'm wrong on it too. Like I certainly don't think I'm absolutely correct. That's just the way that I view all that stuff. He also adds, doesn't mean as a direct comp of the situation. It's just a pushback on Swift getting a big contract. I agree with that. It's not like it's not a contract that makes him uncuttable or unbenchable or whatever. It is meaningfully more guaranteed than Pollard or Singletary got or the other guys got. Like they gave him good money and they gave him good money right away. It's not, whether we call it a big contract or good money or whatever. I mean, it's relative to the running back market. I think relative to the running back market, there's a decent point here. Common ground on people overrating the contract stuff sometimes. Appreciates a breakdown. I'm with you, Gypsy. I think we're a lot closer and a lot more aligned. It's a good conversation. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate you checking out the stream and chatting. Let's make a few more picks. He acknowledges here that definitely some pattern matching. But no, I think this is a good point. We look at peak contract value too often and not just the minimum amount the team is on the hook for. That's a very good point. We got to look at the guarantees and all of that type of stuff. I have so many picks to make. The puppy, but super flex. We're going to jump in here. It's a 3-1-1-1 build right now. This is interesting. Why draft Swift when you can just draft Mixon? Because Mixon goes substantially higher. He goes in the elite tight end window. Swift goes outside the elite tight ends. Joe Mixon has to be drafted, somewhere around pick 60, right ahead of Kyle Pitts. George Kittle goes 7 picks behind him. You still have Xavier Worthy goes 1 spot ahead of him. You still have like Roma Dunze on the board, Jordan Addison. By the time Swift comes off the board way back here at pick 88.8, you're past Jameson Williams at receiver. You're past Jake Ferguson at tight end. This is another good question, and it's a good one to break down. The opportunity cost between 88 and 60 is massive, is so massive. I would take Joe Mixon at DeAndre Swift's cost in a heartbeat. But the opportunity cost at 61 here for Joe Mixon includes some really important building block players that I have a hard time making the running back pick there. I really do. I don't take Mixon. I don't take Rachaad White. I've taken a little bit of James Cook, but not much. I don't take any. I don't think I've drafted Isaiah Pacheco or Josh Jacobs. That's maybe a problem. I mean, it's definitely something I need to consider. But I think elite tight ends and getting that early receiver are so important this year that. And then I also think that the running back profiles I can get are not meaningfully different in this range. Both the Pittsburgh backs, Swift, Jonathan Brooks, what he can add to a build, even Ramondre Stevenson and Zamir White, Zach Moss. You keep going. You have Raheem Mostert down here. I think I'm going to start taking some James Conner. I haven't been taking Pollard, Trey Benson, Javonte Williams, Singletary we just talked about. You can hit 3 of these dudes in a row and not have to take the bad receivers. The 2v2 is going to work out to where you want Swift over Mixon. I would rank Mixon ahead of Swift, but I'm not so confident that he's a way better play that I want the 2v2 when the opportunity cost is that different. Pacheco is a tough fade when looking at the Chiefs' point total this year. I mean, I agree. He's a really tough fade. We are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of our biggest fade stances on ship chasing tomorrow. Sneak peek. Pacheco's going to come up. Like some of the guys we're afraid might hurt us that we're sort of fading. Pacheco's going to come up for at least one of us. So that is something to look forward to on ship chasing tomorrow. All right, I got to go back and make picks. I love chatting with you guys. I get so caught up in the chat. It's fun. All right, this is an Anthony Richardson, Breece Hall, Tua, Devontae Adams, Deshaun Watson at 54, Dalton Kincaid build. What a weird build. 3 QBs. I don't usually take that QB around pick 54, but I guess it was a slight ADP value. I can't really make a case for why I would have done that in this particular draft. I haven't even filled out the queue, which I typically do with my stack options when I have 3 QBs like this. AD Mitchell would be the top option there. My Dolphins are picked through. This is just not a good team. Sometimes we just draft bad teams. Not going to lie to you guys. This is not going to be a good team. I guess Tua and Watson play each other, so I was thinking I'd be able to stack that up, but I haven't done anything to stack that up. I have Breece Hall, Devontae Adams, and Dalton Kincaid as my additional pieces. I did just talk earlier in the stream about T. Higgins being weirdly mispriced just because it's a different API in is it API? Whatever. It's a different rankings list in the Superflex format. We have T. Higgins sitting here. He usually goes at the 3-4 turn in Best Ball Mania. He's not stacked with anything I have here, but this is going to be a poorly stacked team. I don't have a lot of stack options anywhere. Maybe Amari Cooper could have been an option, but he went off the board. His ADP is a lot higher in this format. He tends to go behind Higgins in the other format, but I'll take the other Orange Ohio team. There's at least they're the same color, and they both play in Ohio. Correlation. All right, let's jump into another quick super flex. I'm excited to do some of the other formats as well. This was a Mahomes Dak start that I don't think I've stacked up very well either. That's not true. I have a KC double. Oh, that's right. I took Fields as a bring back on the KC stuff here. Added Jalen Warren in the last round. So now I have, for week 17, I have Mahomes with Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce, but I thought those are both fine picks at those spots. Again, I correlate when I like the pick in the spot. I'm taking these types of profiles in these spots anyway. It makes a lot of sense on a Mahomes team. Fields, I got a little behind ADP as my QB3. I think that's a fun option, and it's a bring back. And then Warren was an obvious RB pick in my last round, right at ADP. I did take him over like Mostert and Javonte Williams, who are picks that I do like as well. I only have one tight end. Goddard is a bring back. And Freiermuth was the guy that I was going to play potentially with Fields as well. But Brock Bowers is the top ADP pick. He's fallen 13 picks behind ADP. Devin Singletary is a kind of fun pick here too. But let's not be silly. I'm going to take Brock Bowers 13 picks behind ADP to get my tight end 2 in a format where I like to open up the roster spots. We're going to go ahead and grab Brock Bowers. That's the pick you can't miss. Let's do a couple more super flex, get these knocked out of the way while we're on the format. This one I have Joe Burrow, JJ McCarthy, Daniel Jones. This one was kind of fun. I took Tyreek Hill and Burrow out of the 111 at the 1-2 turn. I took Chris Olave and Devon Achane, who is, when you can get this dude in the 4th round, it's just really fun. Travis Kelce, Malik Neighbors. I realize it's super flex, but it's still fun. Travis Kelce, Malik Neighbors. And then at the 7-8 turn, there's still some good profiles, and I didn't really want to be going QB here, but JJ McCarthy was way behind ADP. I almost didn't take the 12-pick discount and draft him because I still think he's kind of a tough pick ADP-wise, even in this Superflex format. I don't know that he's going to play all the games. And then he's hard to stack if you don't have Jefferson, which I didn't have. I would have had to take Jefferson with a 97 ADP on the way back at pick 86, 10 picks ahead ADP. I didn't do it. I basically said maybe I'll have McCarthy unstacked. And that gamble paid off when Addison did make it all the way back to me. So I got Addison instead of 10 picks ahead of ADP. I got him 10 picks behind ADP. I just took him here at 107. Score one for making those gambles. So Burrow, JJ McCarthy. What I took on the way back was Daniel Jones on a team where I do have Malik Neighbors, so I was getting a different stack. Burrow, JJ McCarthy, Daniel Jones as my 3 QBs. There's some game started risk, but I like Daniel Jones and McCarthy together because McCarthy's going to play late in the season when the risk of Daniel Jones getting benched is there. Daniel Jones going to play early in the season. Hopefully a really healthy overlap as well for this build in terms of them both playing for most of the middle of the season. Devon Achane. The receivers are Hill, Olave, Neighbors, and Addison. That's really nice. Travis Kelce is the tight end. This is a team where I've starred like all of my correlation pieces on all the different teams, which is telling me near the top of who's available that Christian Watson is a bring back on the McCarthy Addison. That's sort of my tertiary stack, and I don't really like Watson as a pick. And I also don't think receivers the pick in this format here, where I did take 3 QBs. And remember, you can only start 2 receivers in Superflex, 1 flex, 1 Superflex. The 4 receivers are going to support the Superflex if these guys aren't all starting every game. But I do have the 3 QBs to help with the Superflex as well. So probably only starting 3 receivers most weeks. I don't know that I need to go to wide receiver 5 here when I only have 1 tight end and only 1 running back. Those are the positions I'm more interested in. Once again, Brock Bowers, he's a little bit of an ADP reach, but I start him here because I do have Olave. He is correlated. I start him after I made the Addison pick because I was looking at I could also take Njoku. I have both Achane and Hill, and he would be a correlated piece as well. But I'm trying to up the Bowers game a little bit. We're going to take Bowers here. There isn't another strong correlation until some Denver guy or some running backs at the next turn. I like that pocket. I have some correlation options. Javonte Williams, a bring back on Burrow. Singletary goes with Daniel Jones. Those guys are at 124. I need them to fall. I looked at this earlier. I need them to fall to 131. They probably won't. Sutton's an option at that 131 turn, but Chase Brown's another one. So running back is going to be a pocket for me at the 11-12 turn. Good spot to get the tight end 2 here. This build coming together pretty nicely. Puppy, but super flex. Let's jump into one more. I have Xavier Worthy and Justin Fields starred. This is a Casey Pitt thing, I guess, but I don't have any Casey Pitt on this roster. I'm kind of curious. Oh, I starred Justin Fields here because this is another CJ Stroud, Jane Daniels team. I can't take Bo Nix. I'm going to need a quarterback 3, and so Fields makes some sense. It's a Stroud Nico Diggs. This is a fun format to double stack because I only had to use my 1, my 3, and my 5 to make it happen. In between there, I got Jane Daniels, I got Chris Olave, Dalton Kincaid, Keenan Allen. Don't have Daniel stacked up yet. Don't think I'm going to go QB here with Fields because Nix is still on the board for some cover. Russell Wilson's still on the board. Our guy in chat here, STL Bree 1 of 1, says the camp reports for Fields haven't been good at all. They're really propping up Russell Wilson in the coach speak. I have been noticing that. I don't think the play is that they're going to start Fields over Wilson. I think Wilson does all the things and says all the things that coaches want him to say and will probably be the week 1 starter. The play is that he's just not very good in season, and Fields is a dynamic player that they decide by about week 5 or 6 they need to play to fix their offense because it looks bad. That's the idea. I'm not so worried about camp reports on Fields. So I'm not going to go QB here. I'm going to wait to see, though, if camp reports maybe push Fields back to me at pick 104. That would make some sense. Xavier Worthy's ADP, another player, doesn't make any sense, the ADP. Like, he's behind Chris Godwin in this format. He's behind Calvin Ridley just because of a format change. I have 4 receivers already, and I only have the 2 QBs, and they're both on week 14 bye. So I actually have 2 week 14 receivers. I need a little more receiver depth here to support the super flex position. It makes sense to go wide receiver 5 here. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. The running backs at the top of the queue are not guys that I have to have. I'm fine with David Montgomery. I think he's a stable play. Aaron Jones, Ramondre are guys I could take a little of, but these are not guys I'm like trying to get exposure to. I'm really trying to find a reason not to take Xavier Worthy right now, and I'm not seeing it. So Xavier Worthy's the pick, and it also will correlate if I can get Fields to come back, which is probably the little lesson I was trying to tell myself here in the queue with these starred players. I don't really remember what I meant here, but I think I was saying Worthy, and then if Fields comes back, you'll have a little week 17 thing. I could have went tight end there. Evan Ingram has the same bye. Bowers is a lot cheaper. So maybe Bowers is a consideration if Fields goes and I don't have another wide receiver or a QB3 to take. This is similar to what we did earlier today when I took Bowers and I was trying to set up O'Connell to be the QB3 on a different Stroud Jaden Daniels team. All right, we're done with some super flex stuff. Pacheco could be a top 5 RB. That's bold. Good show, sir. Appreciate you guys. Gretchen, man, the people. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Nothing worse than watching a slow draft roster slowly smolder into a pile of ashes. Yeah, I have some, and I agree. There's nothing worse than it. And then Mr. Popinski, appreciate this. We monetize the channel, guys. You can send me super chats. He sent me $5 super chat here. Says, really appreciate the draft theory talk while getting through the workday. Keep it up. Much love. Appreciate you, Mr. Popinski. We only got a few more drafts to get through. We're gonna do these, but we also have to spin the wheel. We have not spun the wheel yet. For those of you who don't know, we're gonna land on a team, and then that team, we're gonna remember some guys. We're gonna talk about some throwbacks, some of the best players in fantasy history on that team. It is the Minnesota Vikings. I know that when that spins, my audio cuts out, so I was trying to be quiet that time. Minnesota Vikings are the team that I grew up rooting for. I'm looking into my closet. I got the old Chris Carter jersey in there. I used to have an Anthony Carter jersey, probably. But Chris Carter was so much fun. All he does is catch touchdowns. Jake Reed, Terry Allen, Robert Smith, Warren Mood played for them for, a year or two, and then Randall Cunningham, Brad Johnson, Jeff George played for him. We could do the Vikings all day. Dante Culpepper to Randy Moss. Troy Williamson was the bust. I think Corin Robinson played for them as well. Who am I thinking of? Marcus Robinson, Bernard Berrien. You guys remember Bernard Berrien? We could do remember some guys with the Vikings. Vasante Shenko. He got caught in the locker room undressing, has a third leg. Nate Burleson, Ontario Smith, the Wizinator from Dylan Strauss. Love that one. Mowelde Moore, Michael Bennett, Sidney Rice, obviously Adrian Peterson. Who else? Ontario Smith, Mowelde Moore. There's another one. Michael Bennett. Is that all that I'm thinking of? There was another running back in that era. Mowelde Moore, by the way, drafts high stakes fantasy football. He was at the FFPC main event draft room, not in 2023, but in 2022. I was drafting at the same time as him. He was on a different table. He overbooked, had 2 drafts, and was running from one draft to the other. Mowelde Moore, fantasy football player. Fun to see that. Bernard Berrien, Robert Smith. Chester Taylor is the other name I was trying to think of from that era. Cordero 1.0. Percy Harvin, you guys. Percy Harvin with the Vikings was so sick. That's one of the best players of all time. Like, not even kidding. His career got derailed, but early career Percy Harvin's was so dynamic. It was incredible. This is the other one from that era. Ontario Smith, Mowelde Moore, Vulture Mo Williams. And Mo Williams is the guy who caught the lateral on that highlight where Randy Moss at the half, they threw a Hail Mary. He catches it at like the 10 and throws the lateral over his shoulder. And I'm pretty sure it was Mo Williams trailing the play who catches the lateral and scores the TD on the last play of the half. Glad to have you, buddy. First time seeing your show. Like your takes and format. You got a new sub. I'm glad to have you. Like I said, appreciate those of you who are new. Hit that subscription button. Turn on notifications. I go live at random times. I'm going to try to make Wednesday morning a little bit of a more consistent one for me. After we do the remember some guys time, we got Jake Reed in the house. We talk a little bit about our expectations for that team for 2024. The real reason we spin the wheel is to actually analyze. The Vikings are an intriguing one. I'm actually going to start here in DraftKings Sportsbook. You guys know that I'm going to look at these things a lot of different ways. Futures. We're going to go to Yeah, this is where I want to go. Division winner. The current odds for the NFC North division winners: Detroit Lions plus 150, Green Bay Packers plus 210, Chicago Bears plus 265, Minnesota Vikings plus 1,000. I don't think people realize the Vikings are 10-1 to win the division. They did bring in some other defenders, but Danielle Hunter was over at is now over in Houston, is over with the Texans. He was like their key pass rusher from last year. They've lost some other pieces. They obviously lost Kirk Cousins, and that's a big part of this as well. The expectation is that Sam Darnold might start or J.J. McCarthy might start right away. McCarthy, from a profile perspective, has some big question marks in terms of whether the accuracy is really there. That's the big part for me in projecting forward a quarterback prospect is accuracy, and that's a little bit of a question mark for him. He didn't ever really throw at a high volume level in college, did a lot of the play action and the different things that tend to boost efficiency. When you control for some of that stuff, he doesn't look as great as some of the other passers in this class. There's some concerns there, at least I know. Yeah, Randy Moss highlights still go crazy. Percy Harvin, let's just keep mentioning Percy Harvin. That guy is a stud. Glad to have you, Angus. Saw me over on CBS earlier this week. That was fun. Most relatable thing ever was driving to Enter Slows. Drove to Mom's every day for a month till UD was legal in Michigan. I imagine Mom was living across the border in like Ohio or something. That's a hilarious story there. Herschel Walker was there for a bit. They traded their entire future for him, and the Cowboys used all those picks to turn into a dynasty. So, yeah, he was there. Yeah, I mean, that's the Tecmo Super Bowl era. I like to mention the Tecmo Super Bowl roster sometimes. They had Rich Gannon as their backup to Wade Wilson as their two quarterbacks in Tecmo Super Bowl. Anthony Carter, Chris Carter were on that team. Hassan Jones was on that team. I want to say Andrew Jordan was the tight end on that team. The 91 team that I know all the freaking Tecmo Super Bowl rosters, so I know everyone's 91 roster for some reason. Mike Merriweather, Al Noga, Brandon Browner were some of their defenders. All right, let's get back to the 2024 Vikings. Obviously, last year, Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler. The one thing I would emphasize here is Ty Chandler's actually good. 4.5 yards per carry. 6.4 yards per target is good. He caught 84% of his targets. It was 7.6 yards per reception is better than Madison. Comfortably more efficient than Madison across the board. More efficient on a yards per carry basis. More efficient on a yards per reception. Higher catch rate. Everything was better than Madison. They obviously got rid of Madison, but I don't think Aaron Jones at his age is coming in to be an every down back. And I do think Ty Chandler is an underrated late round running back I've probably not gotten enough of. In the early drafts, in the pre-draft period, I took a ton of him. And I've kind of just weaned off because I had taken so many, and I've had a lot of fun drafting the rookie backs. But Aaron Jones, 11 games last year in his age 29 season, turns 30 in December, will play most of the year at 29. But obviously has had some nicks here and there over the last few years. He played 17 games in 2022, but he missed time in 2021. He missed time in 2020. He's a smaller back, an explosive back, not an every down back really at any point in his career. I think he's a fine play for this year in the sense of you're going to get some usable weeks out of him if you get the right price, but I don't find myself drafting him a lot because, again, he still falls in that opportunity cost range where typically there's other directions I want to be going with my builds. And I'm concerned. I started with the Vikings odds in their division because I'm concerned about how good the Vikings are actually going to be. And I think that's an important point in terms of how many touchdowns might be there for Aaron Jones, et cetera. That would also be an important point about Justin Jefferson, obviously, who played 10 games and still got over 1,000 yards last year. This guy is an incredible talent. Had more yards per game last year. There's this I opened it in a new window. Let's go to his stats. There's this Y/G receiving yards per game column here. It's in bold in 2022 because he led the NFL that year, 106.4. He actually went up to 107.4 last year, but did not lead the NFL. Tyreek Hill went off, but was basically the same guy. A little bit lower in receptions per game, but a little bit higher in yards per game. The yards per target were very high last year. all of his volume earning stuff. I've shown the yards per out run database at other times. Still really, really good. Let's jump over to that too, because that's a good one to look at for a few different players on this team. And there's not a lot more. Before we go off Pro Football Reference, there's just not a lot more to even talk about here. Jordan Addison is the other one, has 911 yards as a rookie. This is a strong rookie year. We don't expect rookies to be perfect. 100-plus targets, 900 yards. He has the 10 touchdowns, which is the real key for him last year. Really strong efficiency. There are people that are concerned that people are too in on him because of the touchdowns alone. But the research that the guys over at RotoViz have done shows that fantasy point efficiency, like making big plays, including scoring touchdowns, tends in rookies, tends to lead to more volume. The other column I would highlight here is age. I just sorted by age. He's the youngest guy in the offense by a lot. He was an age 21 player last year and had this kind of a year. He turned 22 in January. So, I mean, he was an older 21, but still young player. And that's good. That leaves a lot of room for upside and growth. He did enough as an age 21 guy for me to be pretty excited about him going forward. We're going to jump over to the yards per out run database. Addison's number here, 17.2% at a 12.5% ADOT, a 0.46 weighted targets per out run is solid. The 8.8 yards per target is good. I've heard people call him this year's Jahan Dotson because Dotson had the efficient rookie year. Dotson's rookie year was a 14.9% targets per route run. The weighted targets per route run was close because he had a high ADOT and he was high in yards per target. He was an efficient player, but this is a meaningful difference for Addison to get up to 17.2%. And for part of the year, he was playing with Jefferson and he was playing with Hawkinson for the whole year. I would argue Addison had way more target competition than Dotson did. Obviously, Terry McLaurin, but Terry McLaurin, not a huge volume earner. We've talked about this, that targets per out run column, not elite for Terry McLaurin. We talked about that when we talked about Washington in the last episode. So Justin Jefferson, while out there, only ran 369 routes last year, but 26.6% targets per route. Really strong. Yards per out run's a career high, 2.91. He now has 4 straight years over a 2.5 yards per out run. That is so fucking elite. He's so goddamn good. Excuse my language, but he is so good. Oh, yeah, Benny. It was Steve Jordan. I think I called him Andrew Jordan. Love that. Good catch. Justin Jefferson is an incredible wide receiver. Am I concerned about the quarterback play? Yeah, I am. I'm concerned about the quarterback play, but Justin Jefferson is going to elevate. And I think both Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, man, why am I blanking on his name? Is his name JJ McCarthy? It sounds wrong in my head right now. Both of those dudes are drop back passers. They're not going to scramble a ton. They're going to be solid for pass volume in the way that Kirk Cousins has been over the last few years. It is JJ McCarthy. I had to just check that guy's name. So I at least think, and I mean, with McCarthy out there, they might run a lot. That's maybe part of why they brought in Aaron Jones. The pass rate might not be super high with a rookie QB, but I do think that the number of called dropbacks that turn into pass attempts will be fine because they're dropback passers. And I think Justin Jefferson is going to win on enough routes that you're going to see a high targets per route run. The question is the routes. So look at 2021, 2022. Because Cousins is a guy who drops back a ton, you had over 600 routes both those years. You had 690 in 2022. We talked on the last show about, or maybe actually that was when I was doing something with Sean. Maybe when we were talking about the Commanders. I can't remember. But some of the Commanders guys got over 600. And I talked about how that's a lot. But this 690 that Jefferson ran in 2022 is insane. It's maybe the biggest that I've ever seen for just a regular season. I don't know of. It's not Tyreek. Who would be like CeeDee Lamb has a huge season. 629 is all he got to. Garrett Wilson led the league last year. He was only at 674 last year and leading the league. So, I mean, Justin Jefferson, 690 routes in 2022 is a big part. I mean, in addition to the elite peripherals, but it's a big part of why his numbers were so massive. And in 2021, and I don't expect him to be that high in this offense this year. I expect them to throw at a more reasonable rate. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem. It's also going to be a little bit of a problem for Jordan Addison, who ran over 600 routes last year. Again, the 17.2% targets per route run, not elite, but good enough with the efficiency on top of it for me to expect that to elevate again in year 2, especially because TJ Hawkinson tears his ACL late in the year, which is a bummer. Hawkinson, since coming over from Detroit, has maintained much higher targets per out run. He had 2022 was split where it was weaker in Detroit and better in Minnesota. It gave him a career high number, but it doesn't look great in this chart because it's his whole sample in this chart. And then last year, he maintained that Minnesota split, 24% targets per out run, really strong yards per out run. He's a great fit in this offense, but we don't have Cousins anymore, and we do have a rehab that's going to take until about week 8 or so. It's going to be quite a while until we see. This is interesting. What chance does Garrett Wilson have of finishing as a top 3? And James Young here, another commenter, said like 0%. This is not the stream for you, because my answer to this, what percent chance does Garrett Wilson have of finishing as a top 3 receiver, is probably higher than most. It's a high number. I think he's very much in play to finish as a top 3 wide receiver. But anyway, Hawkinson is going to be out for the majority of this season, and that is a helpful thing for Addison's profile for sure. It's a helpful thing for Jefferson. I think most of the offense is going to flow through these two guys. I think they're going to be concentrated going forward, and when Hawkinson gets back, he'll play into it as well. I love that their profiles don't overlap, that they complement each other. Hawkinson's ADOT typically in the 7.6 last year. I think the last time I did a league-wide analysis on tight ends, that was the average, 7.6 for tight ends. So he's right at the average for tight ends, typically been right in that range in his career. Addison, the average for receivers is about 11.1. Addison's above that by about 1.5 yards. And Jefferson typically has been a little bit of a higher ADOT player too, but both those guys can do stuff at all depths, but they're going to be able to take the top off as well as the intermediate and short range when necessary. Hawkinson's going to be your short and intermediate complement to those guys, stressing safeties and defensive backs more vertically, at least into the intermediate. And typically one of Jefferson or Addison will be probably on any given play getting into the deep intermediate or even deep parts of the field. So I'm not really into like I don't know why I hit back there. I'm not really into like a wide receiver 3 in this offense. Let's go over to their depth chart and just talk about that a little bit, because it is a different offense. They have Brandon Powell listed right now over at Our Lads, which is my favorite depth chart site. That's OURLADS.com. Great site for depth charts. Brandon Powell right now is listed as their starting slot receiver. They have Trent Sherfield, Jalen Naylor. I mean, we don't know who the other guys are going to be. And with Hawkinson banged up to start the season, what I actually expect for the start of the season is that you're going to see probably Robert Tonyan, Josh Oliver, more like 2 tight end sets. They have a ton of tight ends here. They've actually changed N'Keal Harry over to a tight end. Johnny Munt came over last year with, or a couple years ago or whatever, with Kevin O'Connell from the Rams, and is familiar with the offense and will probably play a little bit to help with the Hawkinson hole while he's out. But yeah, I think the passing volume is going to really flow to Jefferson and Addison. I think there's going to be a little bit lower dropbacks and some concerns about overall team strength, quarterback play, and that might hold Jefferson back, but he's so good that I don't want to bet too hard against him in any kind of way. I think where he's going is fine. Like, he's going like wide receiver 6. And when he starts to fall to like 7 or 8 in a draft, I think you're getting a good value, because he's still Justin Jefferson. I just showed you the 2.5 plus yards per out run. And we're not certain that the volume's not going to be high, because it is drop back passers. This gets back to the point from AJ Brown from earlier in the show. We know that there's a kind of a cap on how much they're going to throw in Philadelphia. Minnesota could wind up throwing a ton. They did throw and drop back a ton in recent seasons under this coaching staff, but with Cousins, maybe they wind up being that offense that throws a lot with a rookie QB. It's not crazy to consider. So I'm okay with Jefferson in the middle of the first round for sure. I'm probably leaning towards some of the other elite receivers over him. And so I think his ADP is pretty right that it's not the 101 anymore. I really like Addison in the middle rounds as a year 2 upside swing, especially with Hawkinson taking some time. I'm not drafting a lot of Hawkinson, but I think he'll get cheaper the way Nick Chubb has gotten cheaper. I think eventually I could see myself taking him as a late season back-weighted production type thing, because I do think he plays in 2024 and probably plays fairly well. He's been a good fit for the offense. And so there's an argument to be made that he's a good piece in 3 tight end builds, especially. Aaron Jones, the opportunity cost is tough, but I can see the spike week potential. Ty Chandler, the opportunity cost is much more palatable. And I think he's going to play more. He's going to have more standalone value than people realize, plus some handcuff appeal. Before they signed Jones, they were talking about Chandler as like a guy they really liked last year and they were going to go forward with. They didn't add anyone else, and they didn't use these guys last year. They didn't use Myles Gaskin or Dwayne McBride or Kenny Nwangwu. Those guys need to earn their way into the rotation. Ty Chandler's there. He's in the rotation. He got the playing time last year, got 100-plus carries. It showed he was more efficient than their other backs, did the things they wanted him to do, and the team talks favorably about him. I think Ty Chandler is one of the better late-round picks you can make, frankly, with that combination of standalone value and contingency upside. But the bigger overarching thing on the whole offense that I'm concerned about is whether they're going to be any good. Maybe this team is just really, really bad this year. I think there's enough skill position talent that they don't completely crater, though. I think there's enough that they're going to be good enough from a floor perspective. I think you're going to get Jefferson and Aaron Jones and Addison and then late season Hawkinson and Chandler providing enough explosiveness and enough positive play, and they play in a dome. Their games are going to mostly score some points. So that's sort of my breakdown on the Vikings. Still kind of working through some stuff there if I'm particularly concerned about the team level stuff and that kind of stuff. But oh man, Jim Kleinsasser. Shout out Jim Kleinsasser. I have the original Tecmo Super Bowl game. Gabe Davis says he can still play it. I got a N64 down there with some old school games like NFL Blitz. I have it like in my closet. I used to collect the retro games like, I don't know, 15 years ago. I was buying them off eBay, like all the NES games, and they were like expensive. I put a bunch of money into it. And now it's like, I mean, not like thousands. They were like, the most expensive ones were maybe like $50 or $60. And you'd think like some of them were like $10. I think a couple of them were like maybe $100. Like to get workable NES games. And I thought this was a cool collector's item. And instead, like no one who wants that anymore. That's not the way the world went. Nick says almost full fading Jones at ADP and scooping so much Chandler in my zero hero running back builds. I think that's probably the way to play the running back room. As much as I do think Jones could be helpful, it's just tricky. Drafting some Tunyon and Green Bay, Minnesota stacks, bringbacks, getting some camp love and fading the Hawk injury. I mean, that's the direction I think it would go, is towards Tunyon. I think it's tricky for week 17 to bet that Hawk is still not providing any value. What else do we have here? What percent chance? Oh, we already talked about that. How good is the Minnesota playoff schedule? It's Chicago at home, at Seattle, Green Bay at home. So you get 2 dome games. At Seattle is an outdoor weather game, but it's pretty solid. I mean, it's okay. It seems like they could all shoot out. They could. I mean, I'm open to that idea. Benny says Vikings couldn't hit 20 points the last 3 week 17s with Joe Barry at the helm for the Green Bay defense. I wouldn't say I feel a lot better about it now, but I'm still taking Vikings appropriately. This is kind of how I'm at. Like, I'm not hammering the Vikings, but I'm playing them more than their like odds to win the division and their win total and all that suggests. So I'm actually playing them a decent amount. The Athletic mentioned Hunter Renfrow was a possible late signing. Not sure how much that move would move the needle, but some targets to go around with Hawk hurt and Osborne gone. I think Hunter Renfrow would be a really nice fit in Minnesota. That's a good spot for him. Nick agrees. Renfrow is exactly what they need. All right. I am going to jump into some more of these drafts. Looks like that's all the comments we got on the Vikings segment of today's show. Oh, what did I just click on? There was 2 hours left, but what format? The Eliminator. All right. This is an Eliminator build. Going to be a little bit different with some stuff. I'm not taking a lot of Ayuk in the second round, but the 49ers bye I've talked about a lot is very appealing. They share it with only one team. That team is the Steelers. I'm not drafting a lot of Steelers anyway. So Ayuk becomes an intriguing second round pick in this format, even if I actually like the volume profile for an eliminator format of a Chris Olave or a Devonta Adams more. Those guys have less appealing buys. So I have done some teams where I've intentionally targeted Ayuk and or Deebo Samuel, and not or one or the other in the second round, because getting a San Francisco piece is pretty huge in these eliminators. This is a team where I went Bijan Robinson, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, Christian Kirk, Kyle Pitts, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. So I do have 2 Atlanta players on this one, Bijan and Pitts. It makes it an intriguing option toward Kirk Cousins, although he has a Week 12 bye. And I have multiple other receivers with Week 12 buys, T. Higgins and Christian Kirk, and one of those receivers is tied to Joe Burrow, who is the big ADP value right now. I could actually make a Burrow-Higgins stack. It's a lot of Week 12 buys, but one of the things I wrote about in my eliminator piece is if you go out in Week 12, you actually 5x your buy-in. It's a $10 buy-in in the eliminator. You will make $50 back if you go out in Week 12. So if you're going to stack a week and try to get really fortunate to get through that week, it's the week to do it, or Week 14, which you get actually a 10x payout. You get $100 if you go out in Week 14. I think I'm going to take Burrow here. I like the floor of a pretty strong quarterback in this format. It is more stacking of a buy than I like to do. I'm going to have to really be careful with 12 the rest of the way, but I'm also getting a stack, a Burrow-Higgins stack, which is you still have a 115-seat final in Week 17. You still want to be stacking your quarterbacks where you can in this format as well. I could do that with Cousins later, but now I won't be able to if I take Burrow. But I'm fine with Bijan and Pitts as a directional bet on Atlanta that's not tied to Cousins, because Cousins could Achilles not be healthy, Penix could play, whatever, right? The other play here would be a running back. I wouldn't be Jake Ferguson as a tight end 2. I would just wait on like a Bowers. The running back pocket is nice. DeAndre Swift, Jalen Warren have good buys. Buy 7 and buy 9. Those are 2 weeks that that's the other reason I took DJ Moore in this draft as well. He has a Week 7 buy. Those are the 2 weeks that only 2 teams have buys. So it's harder to get players with Week 7 and Week 9 buys than it is. It's easy to get a lot of Week 12 buys into your build. But running back is a position I know I can easily hit in the next several rounds. Oh, man, this would be a fun Jane Daniels team because I don't have any Week 14 yet, and I have Atlanta bringbacks. But I still think I could take Burrow and then consider Daniels. It would be getting into a pretty true zero RB. Daniels is a guy I want to consider the next time I'm up. Bowers is a guy I want to consider the next time I'm up. And then obviously running backs. But I did take Burrow. It's a pretty big ADP discount. It's stacked up, and that's the way that I wanted to go with that one. Just take the ADP value. Couple of options there would have made some sense. Here's another eliminator. Let's just get our eliminators out of the way. Our buddy Eric Beinfor is in here. This is the one where he started very receiver heavy, 6 straight receivers. And then he's gone 1 running back, 1 tight end, and Jane Daniels in the 3 rounds since. I started 3 receivers: Puka Nacua, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson, Dalton Kincaid, Xavier Worthy, Najee Harris. I took Zamir White in the last round because he was a bring back. No, because he was behind ADP, just 1 pick, because his buy doesn't match up with anyone else's. There was some reason I talked myself into Zamir White. I guess it was the buy. He has the Week 10 buy, and no one else on my roster has it yet. My running backs now are Najee Harris and Zamir White. Those are guys that I'm exposed very lightly to, but both of them have buys that don't get hammered. So I like the rest of the build more. I have Dalton Kincaid, I have Puka, Drake London, Zay Flowers, and Xavier Worthy, and I have Lamar Jackson paired with Zay Flowers. At this stage, Jordan Love is the ADP value. I don't have any Green Bay stuff. I only have 4 receivers, and I would like to be heavier on receiver. Part of why I've went this direction is you get in a room with somebody doing what Bime4 is doing and taking a lot of the receivers you like as well. It starts to thin out the receiver position, right? The draft out of the 2-hole also started with 4 straight wide receivers. It becomes a little bit of an avalanche, but not entirely. But I don't want to chase that at 104. Josh Palmer just came off the board. I couldn't chase it at 89. I couldn't even chase it at 80. When I took Najee Harris, JSN, Rashee Rice, and Deontay Johnson, that group of 7th-round receivers I really like, were all off the board by pick 80. And so I took Harris because of the buy thing and because I take a lot of Warren already. Took Zamir White the next time around. Could have taken Brock Bowers there probably. Curtis Samuel is a top available wide receiver at this point. I have Dalton Kincaid. I don't think the pick's receiver. I think the pick is running back. We've been talking up Devin Singletary. Here's another really boring running back. This is going to be such a boring running back room. But in an eliminator, just like guaranteed volume, that idea of guaranteed volume. I mean, Zamir White might lose it, right? Like he's a pretty fragile play. Devin Singletary might lose it. But these guys are going to get me some early season touches. I'm more willing to do this, draft these types of guys, build a running back room like this in the eliminator than in other formats for sure. And some of it is just how the board has fallen to me. And then the bye week considerations as well. I did not have a week 11 bye, so I took Singletary as well. The idea for this team is that those guys are providing floor, but Lamar Jackson, Dalton Kincaid are hits at my onesies, and these 4 receivers are really, really strong plays as well, and the wide receivers are providing the ceiling. We'll see. It's not my favorite build. The eliminator here, the last one that we're on the clock for, it's pick 8.7. And this one, I got 5 receivers already. Looks more like what I do in some other drafts. Here's another Bime4 team as well. He took Lamar in this one. I went Amon-Ra, Debo, Stephon Diggs, Trey McBride, Xavier Worthy. So my typical 5-round start with 4 receivers and an elite tight end. I take Stroud in 6 because he's behind ADP by about 11 picks, and he's stacked up with Tank Dell. So that was a nice, or no, Tank Dell is who Bime4 took. He stacked up with Stephon Diggs. So that was a nice benefit there. I took JSN in round 7, just mentioned. That's my favorite little trio of round 7 receivers includes JSN, Rashee Rice, Deontay. I already had Xavier Worthy on this team, and JSN's round 10 bye or week 10 bye didn't match up with anyone else's on my team yet, so I kept creating variability there with my buys. At this point, I have no matching buys on this build. That's not true. Stroud and Diggs are a stack, so they both have week 14. But I have a 5, a 6, a 9, a 10, and a 14 in my receiver room, and then my tight ends at a week 11. The reason that's nice is not because I want it to be perfectly equitable, because I'm going to have to stack up some buys, but it keeps me open to take best player going forward without having to worry about buy. If I get a great value, I can go any direction. And so I like doing this through the first 8 or so rounds because of the variability that it gives me going forward. I don't always do it. I just showed one where I have a bunch of 12s because the draft pushed me that way in that one. And now I have to pass up future values at week 12. I just took one with Joe Burrow in that other draft. Maybe I should have passed that one up. I felt like I could take on one more week 12 buy before I start like actively passing up the right pick just for buy reasons. And I wouldn't have done that, the Joe Burrow thing, if it wasn't the case that I talked about where if I go out week 12, I'm still profitable with that build. I'm a 5X on that build. I can think of it like sort of like a cash game play. I'm still going to build that team out where I can have an out to advance. Maybe I'll get lucky, get in a good pod in week 12. But I'd be more willing to stack up week 12 and week 14 for those reasons, as I've talked about. At any rate, back to this team that needs it's a 1-0-5-1. It's probably time to crack the 0 RB seal. I don't think I got to go Bowers yet. I can probably go Bowers on the way back. Well, that'll be just behind ADP, but it would be nice to grab Bowers as my other tight end. If I don't get him, I can take Goddard, who's a week 5 bye. That's nice. Oh, and Schultz is stacked up, but I don't know if I want to do that. Maybe. So I think I'm going to have a nice pick in the next pocket for my tight end 2. Wide receivers pretty picked through. Curtis Samuel's a top receiver here. Quarterback, the best pick would be Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels. I already have Stroud. I feel pretty comfortable about my quarterback floor, and I kind of like the 3 QB builds the more that I work through it. I've talked about this with the Eliminator. So maybe a couple late-round QBs. I don't have any late-round stacks set up yet with any of my wide receivers. It's something to think about. Detroit, San Francisco, Kansas City, Seattle. I guess I could go Geno, but I don't really love his argument for 17 games of starting. Trey McBride, the other pass catcher. None of those guys are set up. So maybe this could be a 2 QB build, but it's not now. It's not these QBs. The pick is at running back. I'm working my way through just to make sure that the pick's not at running back. It is at running back. It's either Jonathan Brooks, who's tough in an eliminator. That's why he's sliding a little bit because he might not play for the first half of the year. But, man, he does still provide late season upside, and that's when the pods get more tricky. Or it's DeAndre Swift, who has a favorable Week 7 bye, and I don't have anyone on that Week 7 bye right now. It's one of those two. And Swift gives me a bring back on JSN. God, I really wanted to take Brooks and then come back with more boring running back volume. But I think Swift's the right pick on this build, and because Brooks maybe isn't the right pick in an eliminator, I'm taking enough of him as it is. Swift's a little bit behind ADP here and correlates with JSN. If I do make it to that Week 17 final with 115 people, I'll have a little bring back. All right. 3 more drafts. Let's look at a few comments. Angus says, big Walker fan, but drafting a lot of Charb. He's going later than he did his rookie year around this time, but actually did well when given the work. Just faced the best defenses in football. I have a ton of Charbonnet as well. Do I have plans to max enter BBM? I'm not 100% sure how that will play out. And in fact, I didn't help that. I thought about that originally, and I did 20 right away, and I thought, I'm probably going to have to do 20 each trip to make it work. And then my second trip, I only did like 5 because I did so many of these super flexes that I was into. Wanted to try more eliminators. I wanted to get in some marathons. There's so many offerings. It's tough, and I can't fast draft. I kind of doubt that I'll get to the max entering range, but I want to at least get to about like 100 and give myself some real bullets because I did well in that contest last year. I had a strong advance rate into the semis, and I had multiple teams. I had one team get like 2 points away, and then another team get like 5 points away. That was with Pete Overset on his account. And then I had another team finish like 3rd in its pod in Week 16. It was reasonably close throughout Sunday. I think I only did like 40 last year in BBM, and I think I had like 6 or 8. It was a good number that made it to Week 16. I can't remember the exact numbers, but we'll see. I don't know about maxing, but we'll see. Most people let Burrow fall without a stack, but probably not smart not to force JD there. Like I could have maybe sent Burrow back around, but he was already 10 picks past ADP. And I think in the eliminator, people are more willing to be unstacked. Eliminator ass pick. Yeah, Pete's line. There was some eliminator ass picks I just made. Happy hump day to you too, Tyler. Tank's your second highest exposure just behind DeMarcus. I love the DeMarcus Robinson love. And just ahead of Brian Thomas. You guys are excited about Brian Thomas. I'm not. So we'll talk about him another time. Or we did on the Jacksonville one. I already tried to tell you guys not to take him. All right. Best Ball Mania. This one's pretty far along. I have Derek Carr starred. He's going to be my QB2 in a 2 QB build. I would guess I probably have Olave, or I have Kendre Miller and Olave. And so I starred Derek Carr. I think I probably have a Vegas bring back. I don't have Brock Bowers or Devontae Adams. Let's look at this build, because this is an interesting one where I got a little bit boxed out at receiver and I don't like the team. I took Breece Hall at 109. I went Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, and then I took Lamar Jackson coming back to pair with Flowers, even though I only had 2 receivers through 3 rounds. That's where I think things get off track. I probably should have taken T. Higgins. I take Kyle Pitts coming back. I'm always going to take an elite receiver when you give me that chance, although taking him over Xavier Worthy may be a little bit risky when you only have 2 receivers at that point. But George Kittle was off the board. Pitts was the final elite tight end, and I didn't have a tight end yet. So I took a Dunze coming back, and then I took DeAndre Hopkins, who I don't take a ton of. After that, I took Ramondre Stevenson working back because every other running back I thought about taking went. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Zach Moss, DeAndre Swift, and Jonathan Brooks all went in the 6 picks between my Hopkins pick and my Stevenson pick. 5 of them were running backs. Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Warren, Swift were like the main targets. So I took Stevenson. The best available receiver by that point was already only Jameson Williams. So getting Hopkins here, I took him after Deontay, Rashee Rice, and JSN, and Jameson Williams was the top receiver on the board. It was well behind ADP for Hopkins, 7.3 picks behind ADP. But I mean, as my wide receiver 4, when Adunze is my wide receiver 3, it's tricky. I take Lockett in the 9th, Javonte Williams, Dalton Schultz as my tight end 2, as a bring back on the Lamar stack, Kendre Miller last round. I like where the running backs are at: Breece Hall, Ramondre, Javonte Williams, and Kendre Miller. Don't really love the wide receivers: Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, Adunze, Hopkins, and Lockett. Kyle Pitts and Schultz is solid at tight end. Lamar is stacked with a bring back, booted and suited. Suited and booted. I don't know how you say that. I am an idiot. I need more receiver depth. And so I immediately click on running back. I mean, this is the pocket where I'm typically taking like a Kamani Vidal. Carr is going to be the QB2. It's got to be a receiver. I know a lot of people are taking more Jalen Polk than I've been taking him. He is the top option here. It does give me an out to play Drake May, although he shares a bye with Lamar. I'm probably not going to do any Drake May stuff, but Nick says Polk with Ramondre. I didn't even see that. I'm already making a little bit of a New England bet with the Ramondre pick. That's a good point as well. So we do grab Jalen Polk in that one. Haven't taken a lot of him. Trying to get a little bit of exposure to him because you got to get something, right? I don't know why I said that. I'm getting tired. What I meant to say was, because it's so wide open there, I got some questions about my Javon Baker picks recently, and I understand the Patriots offense might be bad, but you got to have some humility. They could be half decent. There's nobody getting drafted. Like we got to be open to the idea that there's somebody there that makes some noise. All right, this is a marathon where it's just purely like pick the guy that you think is going to score the most points. So I took Justin Jefferson at 106 in this one. I think he certainly can score a lot of fantasy points. I took Devontae Adams at 19. I took him over Debo and Nico Collins. I think Adams can really rack up volume. Kyron Williams comes all the way back at pick 30. Wasn't really trying to go to Kyron Williams, but getting him at pick 30 is fine. I think that's really good value for what he can be from a ceiling perspective. Trey McBride on the way back, a really nice value at 43. He'd be my tight end 1. I've talked about this. I think he has the most upside at the position. I take Keenan Allen at 54 on the way back that direction in the 5th round. And George Kittle in the 6th. Strong 2 tight end build. And then I reached a little bit to grab Rashee Rice. Not a huge reach, but I took him over Keon Coleman, who was a faller, Jordan Addison, who was a faller, who I like. But Rashee Rice is the marathon pick. Like if his suspension isn't high, you're going to like having him as your 7th round receiver when you only took 3 to that point. That was the other part of it. I'd already taken 2 tight ends and Kyron. I wanted a good 4th receiver. I took him actually 11 picks ahead of his ADP in this format. Very happy with that pick when I look back on it. It's not one that I'm like, I wish I would have went with Addison or Coleman. I think Rice is going to score a lot, plenty of points. And so like Nick says, I think Rice with a suspension still outscores Coleman. And I think that's a fair kind of a point. But the key to that, if he did that, is that he would be all back weighted, right? Like we're not running into, like the first few weeks, I get to use Keenan Allen and Justin Jefferson and Devonta Adams in my starting lineups. They're like my best ball team isn't going to take Rice's points in those weeks. If he's scoring that many points on the weeks where he's active, he's hitting my lineup every week basically, and I'm realizing a higher percentage of those points in my lineup. I'm getting to add additional points to his profile in the weeks where he's suspended, because I'm not having to use him in those weeks. So it's not even necessarily about how many raw points he would score in a suspension. It's like, how many would he score plus whoever gets, whoever late round receiver, even whoever I'm putting in my lineup instead of him in the weeks where he was suspended. Tough run out here in the 5 picks before I went. Aaron Jones had fallen. He goes. And then also Jonathan Brooks, Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, and Zach Moss. It'd be a good pocket for an RB2, but that's a bunch of running backs I want to take. And Ramondre Stevenson staring at me. But I have not taken James Conner yet, and he's a guy that I've considered should I be getting more of him? I'm going to take James Conner. Again, this is the format for it, right? He's going to start. Trey Benson, I expect to probably take over at some point, but maybe he doesn't. Maybe he does in week 14. If I get 13 weeks of James Conner, I'm going to like him at pick 91. The reason not to take him in BBM in those formats is like it's going to be front-weighted production. You're not going to get the back-weighted playoff production at all. You're getting the opposite. He's going to help you get through and then not be the starter anymore. Arizona Rams week 17 as well. Got that belt out. Don't need that in the marathon, obviously. But Nick with a funny joke here in the chat. But Connor, I think, makes a lot of sense in this format. Bindle says Rasheed is a 2024 skeleton key. I mean, I hope so. My begs will hope so. All right, last one. The puppy, but super flex. I came on the clock in this in the last little bit. I started Stroud, Amon-Ra, St. Brown in this one, but I got Stroud at the 10 hole. Then I went Achane, Nico, so I got the Nico stack in the 4th round. Bryce Young as a 5th round pick, just wanted to get another starter, it seems like. I take Zay Flowers as a bring back in the 6th. You can see, though, where Bryce Young's a tricky pick. I didn't have a tight end yet, and I had to pass up Trey McBride to take Bryce Young. I'm intrigued by Bryce Young. But that's probably wrong. That's just probably wrong to take Bryce Young over Trey McBride, even in the format. I get Kyle Pitts in the 7th, so I still get an elite tight end. And if Pitts is right, that'll pay that off, and it'll be nice. And I get Bo Nix at 803, which you're not getting that value anymore. I talked about how in some of the fasts I did, the reason I entered so many of these, I thought the pricing was wrong because I did 4 fast drafts while I was in Arizona before I entered all the slows. I did 5 fast drafts, 4 that were super flex. I got Nix in 3 of them, and I got him outside pick 100 in all 3, and I got him at 144 one time. So my mindset was like, if I can take Bo Nix outside pick 100 in every draft, I want to do as many of these as I can possibly do. And this is, I think, so I had drafted Nix 3 times. This might be only the 4th time I've drafted him, and I had to take him at 87 and felt like it was a good value. So the pricing adjusted quickly in these drafts, and I took him despite him matching an ADP bye week with CJ Stroud in week 14. I've got the star method going. I got all these Carolina, Tampa Bay guys. I got the Denver, Cincinnati guys. They're not arranged in the queue in any way, but it tells me if any correlated players are coming up. I got Zach Moss coming up. He would be a bring back on Bo Nix. He's not really the play I want to make. Deontay Johnson, maybe at 10:03 makes sense because I got to get something with Bryce Young. So if Johnson's a pick at 10:03, I feel a little bit open here because nothing else correlated has to happen here. I only have 3 receivers. You don't need as much receiver depth here. Zamir White, DeAndre Swift are the running back options. I don't think I have to go running back at this turn. The guy that I'm looking at is Brock Bowers as my tight end 2. Unstacked, uncorrelated. And Njoku's a bring back on Achane. And Njoku gets Cincinnati in week 16. And I have Knicks. And so I'll probably draft a Cincinnati player for a Denver bring back. And so then I'm starting to get, multiple bring backs. Bowers is Atlanta, Jacksonville, New Orleans. I do have Pitts. That's an Atlanta play. I often end up with Kendre Miller. So Nick says Bowers, Pitts is a fun duo, but I think Njoku here, what I'm thinking is because I'm so indifferent, and I think I prefer Bowers, but Njoku I think is the solid correlation option. That what I should do is just make sure that nobody goes to Deontay, because it's Ladd McConkey, Christian Watson, who are 2 guys I wouldn't want to take at 10:03 if they came through. JSN I would. Deontay and Rashee Rice. I would be happy to take JSN or Rashee Rice, but I think I'm just going to take Deontay 8 picks ahead of ADP here, because my other pick on this turn is probably going to be that tight end 2, and I'm going to have 2 options. The guy in the turn doesn't have any tight ends, and he's already drafted Gardner Minshew. He's taken Bowers on the turn. He has Adams as well. Derek Carr, Chris Olave. He's building out a whole Saints Raiders thing. The other guy on the turn doesn't have any reason to take Njoku, but it's possible they could both go. Yeah, the Bryce bet is the reason, Nick, that I am looking at just making sure that I get Deontay. I think I can probably push Deontay through. The reality is I think that JSN, Deontay, and Rashee Rice are taking 2 of them is probably the smart move. I mean, I'm reaching ahead to tight ends that I don't take over those receivers in other formats. And why am I doing that? I only have 3 receivers on this build. Yes, I can only start 2 plus a flex, but I still need receiving upside. So I'm trying to think through, like, even if both Bowers and Njoku went. So, yeah, Ryan says KC, Houston, week 16. I was also looking at the KC bring back on Njoku, which I can't take all 3 of those players. I want Deontay to be one of these picks. And so then the other pick I think it could be Bowers or Njoku, but with Kyle Pitts, I could also just punt tight end 2 a little bit more. It doesn't have to be those guys. They're not correlated. This doesn't have to be a 2 super elite tight end build. And I only have the 3 receivers. I've already taken 3 QBs in this format. I have HN at running back. I'm going to push running back more, but I think it's viable to argue that I should be going Deontay Rashee or Deontay JSN here. And so I think the pick is Deontay, and I just made that pick in part because I don't even necessarily know what I want to do with the other pick at this turn. I'm giving myself 4 options, and all of them are quite a bit down the list, by the way, for people who are just listening on audio or whatever. Njoku, JSN, Bowers, and Rashee Rice. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other players ahead of that. There's 4 picks between my 2 picks. I reached a little for Deontay, but yeah, I mean, as Nick says here succinctly, more avenues now, and that's the main reason. Deontay is the player that I wanted to leave this turn with in this build. If I'm betting on Bryce Young at pick 58, pretty far ahead of ADP because I kind of made a panic pick there, then I think I'm betting on Deontay Johnson at pick 106 in a pretty big way. And now I have some avenues on the pick coming back. The reason I'm only considering all these players that are pretty far down the ADP list at this spot is I am on the turn, and those guys aren't going to come back, and that's where I think the value is. And I do think when it comes back, my pick is going to be running back. The tight end window is going to have closed. I don't really think I'll be in a spot to be taking more wide receiver depth at that point. I'll be probably considering running back at the 11-12 turn. So at this 9-10 turn, I'm throwing ADP value out the window. We were talking about how do you weigh all the various things. At this point, I'm overweighing correlation and structural elements where this wide receiver window and the tight end 2 window are both going to close before I'm up again. And I want to hit those things even in the best way that I can, regardless of ADP value at this turn before moving on to running back probably at the next turn. And so in this scenario, ADP value is, I'm willing to reach, and ADP value is no longer the, it's something that should always be pretty front of mind, ADP value, but it's no longer the major concern when all these other factors are here. So that's the way I went with it. I like this point too, from Nick. Have a hard time being constrained to ADP in June, especially when you consider leg up ETR rankings can drastically change in ADP in a few days. I agree. I mean, whether it's the rankings or just like camp news or whatever, like a lot of stuff can change reasonably quick. Chris says, I feel like you're testing my stamina, but I won't tap out. I'll never tap out, Ben. I appreciate you guys for hanging out this whole time. I was testing your stamina. I had planned to only do a 2-hour show today because my gym has like these workout classes. The last one for this morning ran at 11:15. I was gonna make it to my 11:15 workout, and it's 11:50 my time now. So congratulations to me on working out today. I guess I'm going to try to make one of the afternoon ones. But that, my friends, is going to be it. We've hit on everything. We spun the wheel. I'm up to date on all my drafts. I will be back again soon. Like I said, Wednesday's going to be a regular one for me, I think, as much as I can handle it. It fits. Great workout. I agree, Gabe. It was a fantastic workout. Wednesday's going to be, I think, a pretty regular one for me. It just fits with my schedule the way that I want it to. Friday and Saturday are like, and Sunday are like kind of open for me. So those can be some flex days. I'm going to try to do at least twice a week as we continue on. Monday and Tuesday, I usually won't be able to do it. And I have ship chasing on Thursdays at noon. I've done some Thursday mornings, probably won't do too many Thursday mornings so I can have that morning open. Soon enough here, I'm going to start doing all my projections, a lot more stuff, and I'm going to have a little bit more morning conflicts and some other work to be hitting on. But we'll also be doing some guests coming up. I had tried to bring on Jacob Sanderson, who was on ADP chasing this week. You can also see him on Pete Overzet's randomizer this week. He is a star, but he wrote that great article, and I mentioned it earlier in the stream. He unfortunately was a little bit busy during the day today. Understandable. He has a day job, but was hoping to bring him on, chat with him a little bit. I will have other guests popping in at some point, I think, in the coming shows and weeks. And so it's going to be fun. We're going to keep doing this throughout the summer. Subscribe, notifications, all those great things. Thank you guys. Yeah, I wish my daughter was here to throw me a beer. Unfortunately, she's at school. Another great slow draft stream. Another great show from you guys in the chat. Appreciate you guys. See you as well, Pat. Until next time, this has been Stealing Signals.